That in the two previous rounds of the Endurance Championship has won both, and now in the form it races today has a new turbocharger and an adjustable wastegate for that turbocharger in the driving compartment. And this is Alan Moffat's Mazda RX-7, the car that was contentious enough in the form in which it won this year's Touring Car Championship, but which only last night received not only the bigger capacity 13B Wankel rotary engine, but also fuel injection for it. And this is Peter Brock's Commodore, built only 10 days ago and with very important changes to suspension and also to aerodynamics. Good afternoon, I'm Will Hagan. Welcome to Sandown. This is qualifying for tomorrow's Castrol 400 race to be run over 129 laps, the third round of the Endurance Championship for touring cars. It should be a great race because this is the first time that we've had 5 cars all as potential race winners and all up against each other, and it is also the first time that we've seen those cars in the form in which they're appearing here at Sandown today and tomorrow. They are Holden Commodore, Ford Falcon, Nissan Bluebird Turbo, Mazda RX-7 and also BMW 635. Any of them could win. The real point about the weekend is that nobody knows just which might win. So why not join us now as they go qualifying to establish grid positions for tomorrow's 129-lap, 400-kilometre race.
Hello, I'm Neil Crompton, and with the endurance part of the touring car season now upon us, once again the pits and pit stops become very important. And this weekend, as some of you may well remember from this meeting last year, there was a lot of controversy in the pits about the pit lane and the pit counter behind me. This weekend, it's all changed. We've now got 3.5 metres of additional pit lane where the cars can now freely move without getting tangled in cables and other equipment. But the most important thing about the pits this weekend is the fact that many of the teams are now running brand new parts on their cars, and of course that's going to be very important as far as their ability to be able to deal with problems if and when they occur by virtue of the fact that they are new parts. Now, talking of new parts, these are the new parts to end all new parts. You may well recall back in May at the Touring Car Round at Oran Park, ABC Sport announced new changes to the touring car regulations. The most significant change, of course, was Alan Moffat's approval for the 13B engine. The rotor on the right-hand side here, out of the twin-barrel rotary engine, is from the 12A engine that Alan Moffat used to win this year's Touring Car Championship. The rotor on the left is from the brand new 13B engine, and you may be able to see the differences in width between those two. What's the end result? More torque, more horsepower. Alan Moffat's car around about 25 brake horsepower better off than it was before, and quite obviously as a result of that, a little bit quicker. But because the other competitors objected to these changes, there were a number of other changes that came into touring car regulations as of the 1st of September 1983, and we'll be talking about those a little bit later on. Now, as a result of those changes, Alan Moffat in turn has gone back to the National Competitions Committee, and they have in turn approved these parts here. This is the original twin-barrel and twin-throat Weber carby that was powering the Mazda 12A. This is the part that has caused all of the confusion so far in this last 7 to 10 days, because this is the new fuel injection unit for the 13B Mazda. What does it do? Well, it's going to provide the Mazda with more clean and more efficient breathing, and it's also going to provide the Mazda with a little bit more economy, and that, of course, is very important in endurance racing.
Peter Brock and John Harvey have scored the modification this weekend that has left most of the pits envious. That is, they've scored themselves some cut-down gumboots which go over their driving shoes to keep them clean in what has become a quagmire of the pits. You can see it there. The pits would have to be literally ankle deep in mud. It makes it terribly uncomfortable for the crews, very difficult to move around, and if it wasn't for the new wider pit lane, there would be no way in the wide world that the cars would be able to get onto the circuit with anything like clean tyres. That's the better part of the pits we're looking at the moment. But regardless of the conditions in the pit area, which would have to be the worst we've seen in an Australian motor race for some time, the action on the track has been quite spectacular so far in practice. The top 5 cars, all under Alan Moffat's lap record established in February this year of 1 minute 12.4 seconds, as we see now the top competitors in the Castrol 400 coming out for their final session of practice, and already the telltale piece of smoke from the exhaust pipe of the Nissan Bluebird, the second car out.
Down in the foreground there, the widened exit to what is now called Castrol Corner to make it safer, so that if competitors do get into trouble at that very slow corner where a fair number of competitors have come to grief in the past, they can be both hauled off the racing area but also have a chance to recover. The way the track is at the moment with all the mud there, they have very little chance really to make much use of it. It'd be like a skating rink as they head towards the Humes guardrail. And here is the point score as it is at the moment after 2 rounds of the Endurance Championship. Amaroo Park, the Scholastic 300 was the first round, 155 laps. Oran Park, the second round, and George Fury won both of those. They were his first ever victories in racing after switching from rallying, debuting in racing here 2 years ago. Dick Johnson, as you can see, is quite revitalised with the new rear wheels that he has. An excellent effort by Peter McLeod in a new RX-7 that's only done 3 meetings. The Jim Richards BMW, of which we'll tell you more later because it's been quite sensational this weekend. And Murray Carter switching from Ford to Mazda RX-7. He ran only at Oran Park. The second round, Hansford, a potential race winner in the only car run by the Speeder Stuyvesant team, but then ran into pit stop problems, as did Dick Johnson, and so fell back through the field. The Glenn and Barry Seaton teaming, father and son, and Peter Brock there, who's only run 1 round also. And this meeting, the atmosphere quite electric. Look at the blue smoke there.
That's the Nissan Bluebird, and that's a turbocharger problem. The Nissan's allowed to use new turbochargers this weekend for the first time, not bigger ones, but ones which were hopefully going to give the team more reliability.
And I think the Nissan team and the Bluebird team might just be at the forefront of running into problems in this awfully abbreviated time that they have before the major races of the season, because they, Moffat and the Mazda RX-7, Peter Brock to a lesser extent, because his alterations are mainly aerodynamic and suspension, but are coming with changed mechanical bits which they would like to have track proved away from the races, but they haven't had the chance to do it. Here's a brand new motor car that's been quite sensational so far.
Indeed it has. 1 minute 10.7 seconds for Peter Brock in the second session of qualifying today, this being the 3rd session we're on at the moment, and the new look Marlborough Holden dealer team Commodore is flying. Brock has found a number of new modifications, some of which have proved particularly controversial. And the area of major controversy is the new rear wing, which is a movable spoiler, and which is, we will tell you about it later, but which has created a great deal of controversy between CAMS and the stewards of the meeting, to the degree that CAMS have protested against the stewards of the meeting.
This is the all-new SS Commodore. As of the 1st of September, a number of changes. First of all, it's got lightweight Italian Momo wheels, 12 inches wide and very, very tractable as far as getting around a course like Sandown is concerned. The new rules have also provided for Peter Brock to run a lower front dam at the front of the car and also increase the height of the rear spoiler, which will aid him in getting the car lined up perfectly as he comes over the very fast straights at Mount Panorama and also the fast straights here this weekend at Sandown. And Peter Brock, who this weekend is certainly going to be getting stuck into it with some of these very, very competitive cars. It's going to be an interesting day.
Yes, it certainly is. In fact, I'm attacking this race with a certain amount of relish because I believe that it'll be a race rather than driving the car around and hoping that something doesn't wear out, like tyres or brakes or something.
Well, obviously with the new brakes and the new tyres, you're going to be able to push the car a lot harder, Peter.
Yes, well actually we haven't got new tyres, of course. It's the same tyres, or same size tyres, but with a wider rim the tyres tend to last a bit better. And yeah, you're right, we can really drive that car hard and get involved in braking duels and corner fights and things like that. And it's going to be a very spectacular race, I think, to watch. Very fast race, judging from practice times, and very even.
Peter, does it concern you that so late in the touring car season we've had 2 changes, and you're going to be trying a car this weekend which has some components on it which are perhaps a little suspect in terms of testing ability and the ability to last?
It's sort of not the parts that are suspect. What the biggest problem is, the balance of the car is suspect. In other words, your brake balance ratio, if you have it very badly set up, the front brakes can overheat badly, then causing them to fade, and the back ones start working well, and it causes it to wobble around a bit. Chassis balance is a bit different, of course, with aerodynamic aids and the wider rims. So it's really not a matter of the bits and pieces breaking, it's a matter of the balance falling off as the race goes on because of lack of homework. But that's what this race is all about, I think, in terms of Bathurst.
Dick Johnson was third in this race last year, and the Falcon has had a very miserable year through the Touring Car Championship. The defending champion really wasn't in with a chance. But look at the big rear wheels on the Falcon now, the wheels that revitalised that car and let him use the spark that he's had all year, but he's really had to, he's been dominated by the motor car. And so at Oran Park, in a scorching practice there, he took pole position, led the race, mucked it up in the pits, and it wasn't a mistake by the team. As you see him get the tail out there under an enormous amount of power and tremendous traction now at the rear of the car. They knew they were going to run into a problem, which is why they made such a late pit stop. So Dick Johnson is really flying and really very happy with the way the car is at the moment. Equal fastest with Brock, a 1:10.7 at the moment.
In May of this year, the Confederation of Australian Motorsport approved a new inlet manifold for this car here, the XE Falcon. And then subsequent to that, on the 1st of September, a number of other changes were announced. Dick Johnson can now use 19-inch diameter rear wheels, 14-inch wide rubber on the back, and he also has new cylinder heads for the car as well. The car is going to be able to pull up in a straight line a little bit better as well, because it also has bigger diameter front disc brakes. The car, Dick Johnson, is going to be very fast here at Sandown this weekend, and by the look of times at the moment, it's going to be well and truly up on the front row of the grid by the way it's shaping up.
Yeah, we're quite happy with the car, Neil, as long as the governing body settle themselves down and give us some yardstick to work by. Like every time we go out somewhere, we've got to change something and just keep changing things all the time. And, you know, I'm sort of fed up to the eyeballs with it, and I'm just not going to change anything anymore. I've had it.
Dick, looking at the rear wheels on this car now, a very favourable aspect ratio between the rim and the tyre, a very low profile tyre. Is this going to enable you to be able to work the tyres harder over a longer period of time?
Now, all this means is it's got the right tyre fitment for the weight of the car and the size of the car. And it's something that we've been after for years and years and years. And now that we've got it, the car has now become a little bit more competitive. And the tyres, instead of lasting one lap, they last, you know, indefinitely, basically. And especially on a circuit like Sandown. And we're just at the stage now where we can run different compound tyres.
Dick, are you concerned that only 10 days prior to a very important race meeting that you're fiddling around with the motor car like you are?
Well, the ludicrous part about the whole system is that we're allowed 2 half-hour sessions here on Friday to set a car up. Yesterday it was wet, which didn't make it very easy at all. And there's 74 entries out there, and it makes it very difficult to try and set a car up. And you know, like, you need at least 3 days on a circuit to be able to accustom your car and yourself to the particular circuit.
Jim Richards in the JPS BMW 635 CSI was 5th at Amaru Park in the first round of the Endurance Championship, then came 13th at Oran Park after striking suspension difficulties at Midway. But the car that everyone's been calling a sleeper is proving today that it's been just that. Richards is now under the lap record, and substantially so. He was officially recorded at 1 minute 11.7 seconds in the second session of practice, and so far is down to a 1 minute 11.54, which, if he stays at that point, will put him into 4th place on the grid tomorrow.
BMW received all of its concessions back in May of this year. They went to wider rubber on the rear of the BMW 635, and they also received the 24-valve head for this 6-cylinder fuel-injected BMW engine. And Jim Richards, just off to my left-hand side here, Jim, a car which weighs 1,239 kilograms, if memory serves me right, and slightly less horsepower than the Commodore. Are you at a disadvantage now with the power-to-weight ratio, perhaps a little bit down on other competitive cars?
Well, yes, we are. We're a heavier car than the Commodore. We don't put out as much horsepower or as much torque. And on a circuit like this, well, you need a lot of horsepower and a lot of torque.
Jim, are you a little bit disappointed that you didn't get a handout from CAMS like everybody else did in mid-August?
Well, we got our sort of handout in May, I think it was, but well, perhaps they could have been a bit more generous when they gave everyone else some extra options just last month. But we're very happy with the way the car is going today. It's going very good.
Jim, you qualified here last year and I think 23rd position on the grid, which perhaps is a little bit disappointing. With the new concessions, are you going to be able to get higher on the grid?
Yes, we will for sure. I think we should be in the first 5 or 6.
What about the game plan for tomorrow? How do you think you'll run the race?
Well, we'll run the race as a 130 lap sprint.
It's certainly going to be a torrid affair. Who do you think is going to be the best, or who's going to have the best mount, and who's going to be the best driver in this entire 129 lap sprint tomorrow?
Well, that's hard to say. I'd like to think our car will be there at the end, looking very good, which I'm sure it will be. But the other competitors will be doing the same thing. There'll be Nick Johnson, Alan Moffat, Brock, and probably a few of the others will be there as well. But I think that on the 130th lap, we should be looking pretty good.
This is the car that's had most bother this weekend, which up until now has dominated the Endurance Championship. George Fury has won 2 rounds in the Nissan Bluebird Turbo, but this weekend he's had a turbocharger go and he hasn't really got a hot time on the board, and he's trying to warm his tyres up there in a car that really hasn't turned anything. About a 20.8 is his best time at the moment, George Fury. So he wouldn't be a very happy man, because he looks, unless he can really pick it up in the last moments of this practice session, as though he'll be starting a long way down on the grid.
Initially, the Nissan team were the people who received the least out of the original touring car changes when the changes were announced back in May, because this car here was elevated from the under 3 litre class to the 3 litre and over class. But again, with these changes that have come into effect on the 1st of September, it now is able to run an alternative and stronger turbocharger and also different gearbox ratios. And George Fury, after some trouble here last year with turbo problems, that's going to be good news for your team.
Well, yes, but as you can see, we've blown one in practice, and that's because we're trying to see where the limit is of the new turbochargers. They are better and more efficient, but we've got to do a relearning process, if you like. So that's where we're at the moment, Neil.
George, performance of the car so far in the first and second sessions, how was it?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't done a lot of laps. It happened very early on, and so I've only done 3 laps today, so and there's 20 minutes left in another 20 minutes or so, so we're looking forward to that now.
What about your opinion, George, of some of the changes to your opposition?
Well, I'm afraid I think that we haven't got as much as what they've got. I think that's what it boils down to.
Leading the Endurance Championship, 2 wins under your belt, and obviously difficulty and problems here at the moment. Is there time enough to rectify these problems and still have a competitive car that can win tomorrow?
I sure hope so, yes. We've got a very good team here, as you know, and we're all tryers, so we'll be out there trying tomorrow.
Good luck.
Thanks very much.
Fury will be backed up tomorrow by Fred Gibson and the veteran Queenslander John French in the second of the Nissan Bluebirds. And the car you saw behind Neil Crompton and George Fury there is the brand new Nissan Pulsar, to be driven by Christine Gibson, Fred's wife, in tomorrow's race, and she'll be driving solo for the full 129 laps. And so far, she's getting down to some fairly reasonable times in the high teens and starting to learn the car very well.
In fact, has had problems with that car with the rear wing, which has just been one of many contentious issues here at Sandown.
With me at the moment is the Nissan Works team manager, Howard Marsden. Howard, you've got 4 cars in the event this weekend. It's obviously a very harrowing time for you.
Yes, I suppose there are advantages to be old and experienced. I have had this sort of pressure before. The most important thing is to relax, that I must remain calm. If I lose my cool, as they say nowadays, then the whole team will fall apart. So I must look very relaxed. Whether I am or not is another matter.
What sort of role do you have to assume, Howard? What sort of work do you have to do?
And what I have to do is to make all of the decisions. The information flows to me all the time, whether it's designing of the car, sort of suspension on the day, decisions on how hard to run the car, how quickly the drivers must go, all information back to me. and then it's up to me. It's a little bit like having chess pieces. I'm the man who has to make the actual moves. Everybody else does the work. So, if it all goes right, they deserve it. If it all goes wrong, it's my fault.
Howard, what sort of a time do you expect your cars to come in and out of the pits in? Are you looking for a target time?
Yes, we are. If we want to go to a 20-second stop, if we have to put only one fuel churn on. If we have to put two fuel churns on, we think we can do it in 23 seconds.
George's car had a problem earlier on with the turbo. Has that now been rectified?
Yes, it has. New type of turbocharger. We must find its limits, and we certainly found the limits to one of the turbochargers today.
Good luck tomorrow.
You're very kind.
And that's the man with the new turbocharger, George Fury, the winner of the two previous rounds. And as you can see, he's got the whip cracking, and he really does need that, because he doesn't have any really good times on the board, at least up until a couple of laps ago, and time is running out for him. He has about 3.5 minutes remaining in practices. Working it hard under brakes. Round past the pits, where this morning we nearly had a calamity, where Peter Brock was going for a hot lap right towards the end of the second practice session with Jansen tucked in behind him. Looking at, look at Fury right out to the white line at the edge of the track, and a few more centimetres and he's in the mud and gone. And Jansen tucked in behind him looking for a slipstream. They came round and cars in front of them had been given the flag for the end of practices. Fury with his lights on as he charges through traffic. And Brock went for the picks in the biggest way. Jansen couldn't see through him, was just looking at Brock, and just touched the tail end of Brock's brand new motor car, ended up out in the grass. And again, another couple of centimetres, and the back end of Brock's car and the front of Jansen's would have been a dreadful mess. There's Brock going down the straight with Alan Moffat up the back straight, and I've got the watch on Fury for this lap, but Brock is the man who's won. In fact, those two cars together are the only two people who've won this race in the last 10 years. The car leading, driven by Peter Brock, has won it 8 times. Alan Moffat's broken that sequence only twice. Last year, in a most contentious finish to the race, where he covered the greatest number of laps but wasn't given the checkered flag, was docked 2 minutes for allegedly going too fast through the pit area, all sorts of squabbles, finally resolved only months later back in the appeals court, and the race finally awarded to Alan Moffat. Can they do it tomorrow? Dick Johnson, Jim Richards, George Fury and plenty of others, they're going to try and make sure they don't. Back straight they go again on this 3.1 kilometre circuit, which tomorrow for the Castrol 400 really should resound to some tremendous racing. In my opinion, and those of many people around the pit area, if they don't get a crowd of 35,000 at least, it will be a disappointing crowd, because this meeting really has a lot of excitement and a lot of anticipation about it. Hooking round onto the main straight, still with Moffat tucked in behind him, both of them looking for hot laps. Moffat deciding that the small frontal area of the Mazda is good for a tow down the straight from the bigger Commodore in front. And both of them circulating. In fact, that's at 10.7, and if Moffat's done the same, it would pull him up. No, sorry, let me take that back. Our timekeeper's just doing a bit of subtraction there as Moffat goes under Brock, under brakes for the renamed Castrol corner, onto the back straight again in these dying moments of practice.
Five cars are under the lap record in practice for tomorrow's Castrol 400. Peter Brock and Dick Johnson on 1 minute 10.7, Alan Moffat 1 minute 11.5, Jim Richards 11.7, Alan Greiser 1 minute 12. Please join us tomorrow on ABC Sport at 12:30 in Queensland, Tasmania, New South Wales and Western Australia, at midday in South Australia and Northern Territory, and at 11 p.m. tomorrow night for edited highlights of the Castrol 400 here in Melbourne. It's going to be a race like we've never seen before in Australian motorcycle racing, more speculation than we've ever seen, so please...
Moffat won it, breaking a run of 7 straight for Peter Brock. It will be really on here today. But of course, spring in Melbourne also means inclement weather. It's cold, a bit of wind around, and the prospect of a lot of rain. And so we could have a race which could be determined by pit stops and tyre changes, and the action should be fast and furious here this afternoon over the 3 hours of the Castrol 400. Let's meet the drivers.
Peter Brock, Holden Commodore number 05. Dick Johnson, Ford Falcon number 17. Greg Hansford, Mazda RX-7 number 42. Alan Moffat, Mazda RX-7 number 43. Alan Grice, Holden Commodore number 6. Jim Richards, BMW 635 number 31. Gary Rogers, Holden Commodore number 11. John Harvey, Holden Commodore number 25. George Fury, Nissan Bluebird Turbo number 15. Fred Gibson, Nissan Bluebird Turbo number 16.
Hello, I'm Neil Crompton, and I'm standing in a very pit lane here at Sandown right at the moment as the cars come out onto the circuit for the 1983 Castrol 400. The new pit lane here at Sandown is now 3.5 metres wide. Some of you may recall the trouble that was here last year in the 1982 Castrol 400. That hopefully is not going to reoccur because of the extra space. Cars aren't going to get caught up in cables, and the crews now have a lot more space to be able to work in. It's going to be very important in the pits here today because many of the cars have got new components on them, and it's critical that the crews be able to handle the problems even when they do happen when the cars come into the pits, because quite obviously they don't know how some of the cars are going to react over some 3 hours of racing. So let's take you now to our commentators for this afternoon, and we've got Will Hagan with John Smales.
As cars line up on the grid, it'll be a capacity 40 car grid for this 129 lap, 400 kilometre journey around Sandown, and the tension building up to this weekend has been quite incredible because this is the first time we've seen all the main contenders against each other in the Endurance Championship, and for that matter we didn't see it either during the Touring Car Championship earlier in the year, and it's the first time we've seen them in current specification because the specifications were changed by CAMS at the beginning of August, and then there were further changes at the beginning of September, and the times yesterday were sensational.
The top 8 cars are under the outright lap record set by Alan Moffat in February this year, 1 minute 12.4 seconds. Peter Brock on pole position with a 1:10.7 was shared with the next 2 drivers, Dick Johnson and Alan Grice. Every one of the top 8 drivers has improved his times, and most notable was Jim Richards, back in 7th position on the grid in the BMW, who improved his times by an amazing 3.8 seconds from last year. 1 minute 15.5 seconds was his lap last year in the Castrol 400. 1 minute 11.7 this time.
The interesting thing was that as of the first issue of times after the 3 practice sessions yesterday, 4 of the top 6 grid positions were actually the same as in the previous year. Brock, Johnson, Grice started positions 1, 2, 3 last year and are doing the same this year, and Fury was to start from 6. But there you see Alan Moffat's listed at 6, and that's because in the 3rd practice session yesterday, Moffat ran wheels which Alan Grice protested about. They were sticking out beyond the mudguard or the flares by about 1 centimetre either side, and his 3rd session time was disallowed, and so he was slotted back from his original 4th grid position to 6th grid position, bringing 2 up in front of him, and so that upset the sort of the correlation with the previous year. It hasn't greatly apparently upset Alan Moffat, who's quite relaxed about the situation.
Although another 4 points of protest have been entered by the STP Roadways team of Grice against Moffat, and those protests are to be heard after the event, so Moffat is starting this event under protest. As you hear the huge crowd at Sandown in the grandstand cheering for their heroes.
Watch it.
And despite very cold weather at Sandown, quite a strong wind blowing, rain this morning at 8:30, 8:45, there were queues of cars to come into all the entrances here. If it had been a really fine sunny day, I have no doubt there'd have been a crowd of 35,000 people minimum, because, as I say, the anticipation of this meeting among competitors as well as among the public has been quite phenomenal. There's Dick Johnson's car in its newly repainted trim, the trim in which, when it debuted at Oran Park in the 2nd round of the Touring Car Championship, it absolutely flew. It grabbed pole position, it led the race until, of course, he had problems with his pit stop on about lap 70. He went further than most other people. He looks across there at his arch rival rival Peter Brock. But Peter Brock's won this race 8 times. Dick Johnson's never won it. Alan Moffat's won it twice in the last 10 years. So just Moffat and Brock have shared the glory in the Sandown 400 over the past 10 years. Dick Johnson with his mechanics in the pits that he's talking to now, George Shepherd, but particularly to Wayne Eckersley, Alan Jones's former head mechanic when he won his World Driving Championship. And there you can see the inside, the working compartment of a race trim Ford Falcon XE, one of the quickest four-door cars in the country.
Johnson's car has a problem today as well. If it rains, he has only one set of wet weather tyres, and that may not be enough to get him through. So Johnson praying for dry today.
Those prayers seeming to be answered because they're starting on dries, so if the race goes any sort of distance at all, Johnson is out of the woods then. What all the drivers want is consistent conditions through the race. They really hate the thought of it starting to rain and the conditions being variable through the race.
There's young David Parsons co-driving with Peter Jansen in the car which has not turned a wheel since Sandown in February this year, but which has managed to put itself on the second row of the grid here at Sandown today with a time of 1 minute 11.3. The two cars in front of Parsons Jansen, the Brock and Johnson car, will be driven solo by those two drivers. Kevin Bartlett is in Hong Kong, and Larry Perkins entered as co-driver to Peter Brock. He is running Brock's pit today. Brock wants to do this race solo.
While talking about the weather conditions, the forecast in Melbourne today is for showers with the possibility of hail even, so it could be a wild and woolly afternoon.
We're looking south in that shot there, and that's where the weather will be coming from, up from Apollo Bay. And the prediction is at least for 20 knot winds this afternoon.
Start line officials indicating 2 warm-up laps prior to this critical endurance race. And we talked of the weather putting off some of the crowd, and you can see there are plenty who still decided to come because they know they're going to see a great hard-fought road race. Start to have their first look at the circuit in its race condition. They had some warm-up laps this morning. It's 3.1 kilometres around. The first corner is Yella Terra. Used to be called Repco. The tight, well, sweeping left-hander. It's not too tight. It's quite a fast one. Round past the pit area, then up to the renamed Castrol corner here with a new runoff area to the outside. You can see it there from our high position. Very muddy. So any driver gets in there, firstly will lose very little speed before he hits the fence. Also will find it perhaps hard to get out of there again. Next shot sees them in the right-hand kink as they head or line up to go up the back straight, a section that's very nearly as fast as the main straight past the grandstand.
Pulling at least 140 miles per hour in the old language as they crest Rothman's Rise at the top of the back straight, a very bumpy back straight.
And Brock and Johnson anxious to get going and to start pacing themselves at their own speed. To warm brakes properly, transmissions, engines, get them running cleanly. Down through the S's, very difficult section of circuit, Dandenong Road corner there. A very slow corner, about similar speed to Castrol corner at the end of pit straight.
Move down to underneath the Dunlop Bridge over the causeway, a particularly dangerous section of track where the stanchions of the bridge lie in wait for any driver unwary enough to get the tail of the car out.
You saw the trouble Fury got into there in our opening titles in the Touring Car Championship round, just missing the fence by centimetres, and then out onto the bumpy main straight. Full flight.
And now off on the unfettered warm-up lap to warm up the tyres properly.
In the top 7 grid positions, 5 different makes of cars, and consider that the BMW 635, which hadn't gone so well in the 2 previous rounds, one of few cars, in fact, to have started in both of the previous rounds. The Nissan Bluebirds are others, but Brock and Johnson and Moffat didn't do so.
The endurance Championship at the moment has seen 2 rounds go by at Amaroo Park and at Oran Park. George Fury has won both of those rounds and therefore has a maximum 50 points ahead of Dick Johnson. Then the McLeod, Graham Bailey, Mazda RX-7 on 20 points. Jim Richards in the BMW has had a 5th and a 13th at Oran Park. Then Murray Carter, who didn't start at Amaroo Park but scored a debut 4th at Oran Park in the last round of the title, is next.
Jim
Then
Richards,
Greg Hansford, the Moffat teammate in the Mazda RX-7, ahead of young Glenn Seaton, Barry Seaton's son, doing an expert job this year in the old Ford Capri 3-litre V6, ahead of Peter Brock and Larry Perkins. Peter Brock and Larry Perkins, who are co-drivers and therefore share points. They came second at Amaroo Park, but share points. In other words, Brock, if he'd driven solo at Amaroo Park, would have received 23 points for his second place.
And already trouble in the pits as car 32 comes in there.
That's the Tasmanian Johnny Walker in the Mazda RX-7.
But if we go to 7th grid position, Jim Richards, for instance, in the BMW that hadn't run so well in the 2 previous rounds, he was only 1 second off that sensational 110.7 shared by the top 3 drivers on the grid. So let's recap as the way they'll start this 400-kilometre, 129-lap dash around Sandown. Brock and Johnson, front row of the grid. Holden Commodore, Ford Falcon, both 110.7. Holden Commodore Grice, the second row, beside the young Tasmanian dairy farmer from Devonport, David Parsons, a 111.3. Third row, Nissan Bluebird Turbo, George Fury and Alan Moffat, Mazda RX-7. There you see Grice, Parsons, and then Moffat, Fury. The row behind sees Richards, the black BMW furthest from camera, and Steve Masterton, the Falcon closest to camera, going well, starting in his first Endurance Championship round. The next row, the Graham Bailey, Peter McLeod Mazda RX-7, and closest to us, Gary Rogers, driving Clive Benson Brown's Holden Commodore. The row behind, Warren Cullens in 22, John Harvey's in 25. Behind that, Terry Shields in 37, running a 12A Mazda engine, but beside Greg Hansford, who also is running a 12A, where his teammate Alan Moffat has both a 13B, the bigger capacity engine, and fuel injection. The row behind has Fred Gibson and Rusty French.
39 starters in the Castrol 400 for 1983.
An enormous mix of cars, and really any one of 5 different brands could win.
And despite the recent invasion of the Japanese makes, the crowd that comes to Sandown loves a Holden Ford battle, and they have it on the front row of the grid with Brock and Johnson. 1
minute to go. The drivers have to remember that this is a long-distance event. It is not an Australian Touring Car Championship sprint, but I think in the opening laps that thought may well not enter the heads of the drivers in the top cars.
I expect it to be a ferocious scrap in the opening laps, and within as few as 6 laps they might be lapping traffic, and that will make the intensity of it worse. 30 seconds remain. Brock, the hometown boy, Johnson, the Queensland invader, Parsons, the hero, 10 seconds. Grice, the bad boy, Fury, the quiet, lovable one, Moffat, the one they hate. The flag's up. They're off. Johnson away beautifully, Grice following quite well, but Brock's in second. Parsons, Fury coming through.
No, Brock's through. Brock is through. Johnson faltered.
Peter Brock leads past the pits. Johnson settles in second place. Grice in third.
Fury
around Castrol.
Masterton in 5th. BMW 6th.
Parsons up alongside the BMW. Oh, it's the Slick 50 Mazda.
Grice going around Johnson.
Has Johnson got a problem? Where's he gone? Grice has sailed out past him.
Johnson in third.
And he's lost a second to Brock. Got Fury breathing on him, Jim Richards, Steve Masterton, Parsons, McLeod, John Harvey. Moffat way back there, behind Gary Rogers.
Canny position for Moffat to be in at this time.
One car didn't leave the grid, which we see there.
2 cars.
And the crowd who love Peter Brock, he's won this event 8 times, and after 1 lap he has a clear lead.
Standing lap, 1 minute 17.6 seconds. That's as quick, or quicker than their flying lap in the race yesterday. And it's Johnson pitting.
Well, he must have had a problem.
Here he comes.
He slipped back when Grice went straight past him up the back straight. And he got gear selection problems.
Shepard is at the door, but it's all over. He's taking his gloves off, and Dick Johnson is out of the Castrol 400 after only 1 lap.
He's broken something when he got off the line because he got a brilliant start, then was hauled by Brock. On the back straight was hauled by Grice, as we see Richards there. Quite well placed. Grice out after Brock. Fury's 3rd, Richards 4th. Parsons coming to 5th. Finally, car 12 gets away from the grid. That's Jim Keogh.
And Peter Brock, just coming into his 3rd lap, is about to catch up with Jim Keogh already.
Parsons going to the pits. Masterton, John Harvey in front of Masterton, and Gary Rogers in behind him as Parsons goes to the pits. Moffat is next placed, then Peter McLeod.
Peter Brock turns a lap of 1 minute 12.7 seconds, 0.3 of a second outside the lap record at Sandown.
And 55, Barry and Glenn Seaton's Capri parked out on the grass.
The gap between Brock and Grice is 1.9 seconds after only 2 laps.
Minus nearly 2 laps. Jim Keogh in 12. Didn't get away with the pack left the start line.
Neil Crompton is in the pits.
Dick Johnson, how disappointing. 1 lap into the race in the Castrol 400 of 1983 in trouble already.
Well, I suppose it's the way it goes, but at least we've probably learned something by now. And off the line, it just decided, the clutch just decided not to work anymore, and it's slipping like mad. And I couldn't do anything about it. You know, I got a good start, low gear. When I went to go to get second, there was just no second gear there because the clutch wasn't operating correctly.
A clutch plate, perhaps, or springs, do you think?
No, it's just burnt the plates out by the feel of it.
Dick, any chance of you driving later in the event?
I don't know. I might bring my road car out. That's about all I got to drive.
Pick up there, Greg Hansford. Back in the field at this stage. So the order actually is changing as we look at Peter Brock up front. It's Brock from Grice who's staying with him and pulling perhaps a bit of ground. Fury's 3rd. 4th is Jim Richards. 5th now is John Harvey. 6th in car 11 is Gary Rogers. And then we have Moffat behind him. As Brock finds his way around Keogh. Grice with him, and not much of a gap. There's Fury, Richards, and the tail enders.
And the tail ender is going to get a lot more of that in the next 127 laps. As now Grice tucks right in behind, passes Keogh.
Will give Keogh no courtesies at all if he can't get the line that he wants for the corner at the end of the straight. The gap 0.4 first to second, and 3.7 back to Fury 3rd. Grice wants the lead though. Look at him hounding Brock, hauling him in. Brock lapping in just under 13s, 1:12.7 and a 12.9. Grice going faster. Grice, the man that was given the checkered flag for victory in this race last year, over Alan Moffat, who ended up covering 1 lap more. And who, after various appeals and hearings, finally was awarded the race. Brock went out fairly early on with a gearbox problem.
That was unusual for Brock, because one thing you can say about him is reliability around Sandown over a decade has been superb.
It has been that, Drew, but the problem that struck these drivers in the last couple of years has been here comes Grice, under brakes, and he'll do it. New leader in the Castrol 400, Alan Grice, car 6.
And Brock was quite handy, in fact, to let him through. You saw him getting out of the way there. He wasn't prepared to argue. He's setting his own pace and happy with it. As the gap from second, this pair back to third, has now gone out to 4.3 seconds to Fury. Brock not perturbed by this charge from Grice. And in fact, the advantage could be that Grice will be the man having to make the way through traffic. He's the man alerting all the traffic that the leaders are on their way through. And that's a job where you can get balked and where a competitor may not see you. So Brock may be playing it cagely, although he's dropped a fair deal of ground there in only half a lap.
One of the concessions made by the Confederation of Australian Motorsport to the Commodore drivers this year has been much larger front brakes. They're allowed to run 13-inch front brakes instead of the 11.5s they previously had. However, Grice is having difficulty with his brakes. He's still running his old pad size, and as such is not being able to stop his car properly.
Let's go down to Neil Crompton in the pits as Jim Richards has now come through to third, putting Fury fourth.
David Parsons in the pits. Young Tasmanian driver did so well to qualify the car, but the temperature gauge is off the clock.
That's right. It's general handle. I see the alternate light come on. I knew straight away what it was. Nearly had a big lose over the back through water coming on the drive side front rear tyre, but lucky enough to escape that, but it's just put us right out of it now, but you never know what can happen.
I noticed you've started the car once again, so it looks like there's a chance you can get back into the event.
We'll be back in all right, there's no problem with that, but it's just a shame, that's all. I mucked the start up a little bit, a few too many nerves and what have you, but good strong motor. I'm convinced that we could have got back up indoors, but anyhow, it's all practice.
Meanwhile, Alan Grice leads clearly now over Peter Brock coming down the main straight.
The prize money and prestige of the Castrol 400 and the James Hardie 1000 coming up in 2 weeks' time has brought a lot of cars out of garages which haven't turned a wheel for a long time. One of those is the Parsons Jansen car, and it's paying the penalty of not having recent development.
He's Moffat on Fury, so Fury was fourth, he's now fifth, Richards is third. Moffat fighting his way forward, Fury boxing him out there. Oh, Moffat will not like that.
Oh, and there's Steve Harrington, who's hit that Dunlop bridge we spoke about earlier on the warm-up lap. He went into the causeway right there.
There's various bits of the car on the track.
Harrington is Grice's teammate, of course, and the son of the owner of the STP Roadways team, Ian Harrington.
There he is. So the team has the race leader and also one of the cars badly damaged and out of the race.
A car, in fact, that was damaged in practices too.
Alan Grice coming up behind a slower car. Whipped through on the inside. Another one. Same place. Look out, this is dangerous. Ooh.
That's Jim Keogh, the Toshiba car.
Terry Shield, the first one to come across it, had to fight his way through. The gap first to second, Grice to Brock has now gone out to 2.2, and the gap back to third place Richards. As Keogh finds a safe spot for his car, is now 5.7.
And identifying the car that's been on the side of the track right from the warm-up lap is, of course, Glenn Seaton and Barry Seaton, the Ford Capri V6. So bad luck for the father and son team from Sydney. Not even getting to start in the event.
3-litre class will be interesting. Looks as though it might be a battle between the 3-litre Capri as we watch third, fourth and fifth place having a real dust-up.
Moffat's through Fury and on the tail of Richards.
at the moment, the under 3 litre class being led by Laurie Nelson from the new Nissan Pulsar Turbo, Chris Gibson second in that class. Fury, her teammate, on the tail end of this dice as Moffat goes down the inside of Richards.
And he'll have him.
Both of them left-hand drive, and Moffat's third.
Great performance by Moffat, because when they settled down, he was as far back as 7th or 8th.
Moffat pacing himself well for a long-distance event. Wanted to stay out of the way of the anticipated early lap scraps as Fury sideways, almost in that mud, which could claim him so easily. And dropping right back off the dice. But Moffat with the fuel-injected 13B Mazda engine, the controversial vehicle.
Which puts a question mark, perhaps, on his reliability. He doesn't know, we don't know, but he's putting a little bit more power and certainly more torque through the motor or through the driveline. Whether that might produce a gearbox or driveline problem, axle differential, we don't know, but let's go down to the pits. And there you see Keogh's car. Some fairly unscientific attempts at repair.
New Zealand's currently top touring car driver Leo Leonard has flown out to join Keogh in this car for the Castrol 400 and for the James Hardy 1000, but it doesn't look as if he'll be getting a drive today.
Jim Keogh just moving out of the pit area in the Toshiba Commodore. It looked like he must have had a fair solid bit over on the back part of the course, because the whole right-hand side of the car was completely stoved in. They had a flat rear right-hand tyre, and the front spoiler was rubbing on the front right-hand tyre. That problem now been rectified, and the car rejoins the race.
And the gap between second and this man third, charging and hauling in second place Brock, is coming down. It was 4 seconds when we last timed it, and I don't think there's any doubt that it's come down since then. It was 5.2. So Moffat in a big hurry to get up into, not even satisfied with third place, as we look at the positions after 10 laps of this 129 lap 400 kilometre Castrol 400. Grice, the race leader, goes through well and truly among the traffic. Brock, there's Moffat then. 4th place behind him, still Jim Richards. 5th place is Fury. 6th place John Harvey. 7th place Gary Rogers.
And Fury stopping. Fury's coming to the pits. He's limping down the main straight at the moment, and George Fury looks like he's out of the event. Fury popped his new turbocharger yesterday, the IHI turbocharger, allowed under the new CAMS regulations. He wasn't happy about going to untried equipment in today's event, but it could well be that that's forced him out. And there's John Harvey in the pits as well. John Harvey with a dent on the front of the motor car.
But it did have a dent from yesterday. Oh, it wasn't on the front.
No, that's a new one. So John Harvey out of the race in 6th position, and George Fury also out, or at least in the pits. No, he's out. He's putting it right away at the back of the pit area, and that's the last we'll see of George Fury today.
Nissan team manager Howard Marsden, when I was talking to him this morning, wouldn't be specific as to what turbos they were running in the two Bluebirds, but he intimated that they weren't necessarily running the same ones. So whether they decided to put Fury on the IHI because it does produce more power than the Garrett, and to see what sort of reliability factor it had, and keep Gibson as the steady runner on the known quantity of the Garrett, we don't know. It could be reversed to that, but it is certain that they weren't running identical turbos.
Moffat moves to within 2.2 seconds of Peter Brock up the back straight. There's Brock, and harrying him soon will be the Alan Moffat car. There's the race leader, Alan Grice, car 6. Behind him, Peter Brock right there, 05. And then Moffat about to round up the BF Goodrich car of Barry Jones. That car running on radial tyres, which has dropped at about 3 seconds off its pace from last year's event.
Well, still really in the sprint section of the race. We've lost a man who qualified second, Dick Johnson. The man that qualified 5th, George Fury. The man who was on 4th grid position but is out again, David Parsons. And the man who qualified 12th, John Harvey. That bodes well for the likes of
2.55 seconds the gap from Alan Grice to Peter Brock. 1.79 from Alan Moffat, charging through the traffic onto the tail of Peter Brock now as they round Castrol Curve. There's Grice. There's Brock, and there's Moffat right behind him.
How often have we seen these two men in a duel? And in the very early stages, on the 13th lap, here they are again.
And the grandstand this time round will be standing and inflamed.
The most memorable duel, I think, between them was when Alan Moffat made a sole guest drive in Marlborough Holden dealer team Commodore, the John Harvey car. John Harvey was up here talking with us and watched Alan Moffat give his car a fair old caning and a lap down, try and hold Brock up on the final lap. And Brock speared through him on the run down to Dandenong Corner in one of the most brilliant pieces of driving I've ever seen.
No one in the grandstand is sitting down. They're all on their feet screaming for Brock and for Moffat, a few of the crowd.
And then remember down at the Touring Car Championship round when Moffat went the other side of Alan Grice here, the outside, tried to outbrake him to take the lead in the Touring Car Championship round, went out wide, the wheel patted up and down on some bumps and broke an axle and was out, and Grice won the round.
Rounding up the Maninka Alpha. 2.77 seconds separates Grice from Brock.
Battle for second place behind Alan Grice. Brock second, Moffat third.
A gap 2.4 from forward from Brock 05 to Moffat to Grice 6, and Moffat is now in second place. Brock third. 2.4, remember that time between Grice just going out of camera and Moffat chasing and hauling him in. And Brock, I think, quite happy at the moment to let others on more urgent missions tear away.
And he is tearing away.
But the question mark is Brock being conservative and just running the pace he wants, or is he being forced to be so? Because he really hasn't got much more in terms of knocking his tyres and other components around. Moffat has to treat the race differently. He has to sprint and to stop the big cars getting away. And let's go down in the pits to Neil Crompton.
Howard Marsden, Nissan team manager, what was the problem with George Fury's car?
We're guessing George hasn't communicated, but I think it may well have been the turbocharger.
A little disappointing considering a car or a turbocharger which was fitted for more strength.
In fact, that car doesn't have that turbocharger. We split our options because we're still learning with the new type of turbocharger, and that particular one had the old model turbocharger, so I don't know that it is turbocharger. That's my guess anyway.
Well, Howard Marsden confirming what we knew, that they were running different turbos, but in fact going the conservative way with his lead driver, and it turned out not to be the safe way, running the old one, which they thought was a known quantity and safer. Didn't work. The gap now, Grice just going through. Moffat there, 2.3. Murray Carter behind, Peter Brock then. Carter incidentally qualified 20th. The time, 1:16.4.
Flying 8th, Steve Masterton also now heads to the pits. Terry Shield also coming in the Mazda RX-7.
Bad luck for Shield. He was 5th in this race last year.
He's blown 4 engines so far this year, which is most uncharacteristic for the very reliable rotary powered Mazdas.
George Fury, trouble with the Datsun?
I'm afraid so, yes. As I told you yesterday, with this new turbocharger, we're still testing its limits, and it seems that we've gone over it a bit in the hope that we'd be competitive. And as you could see there, we weren't really competitive anyway, and we blew the turbo anyway. So we'll see what happens from here on in.
2 wins already. Good luck in 2 weekends' time.
Thanks very much. Thanks.
Steve Masterton in the pits. This car produced by Pat Purcell, formerly race mechanic for Bob Jane, the man who built the magnificent Monza that Peter Brock was involved in that huge accident in Adelaide a few weeks ago in the Australian GT Championships as Terry Shield leaves the pits. Masterton hoping for much better things in this Castrol 400. The Sydney builder has invested a lot of money in his motor racing.
Alan Grice weaving through the traffic down the main straight.
And coming up past Chris Gibson in the Nissan Pulsar Turbo. Have a look at this car. You've never seen that on television before. On the right-hand side there, tucking in behind Moffat. It's lying second in the under 3 litre class, 2.5 seconds in arrears to the V6 Capri of Laurie Nelson. Fascinating little car, some 250 horsepower and 800 odd kilos. A lot of wrangling about the legality of its rear wing or aerofoil yesterday. You can see it's a much smarter looking device than all the other touring cars have. And that may well be reviewed before future races. Front wheel drive, so an enormous amount of power going through the front wheels. And the delightful and most capable Chris Gibson at the wheel. Saw a flash of Jim Richards back there in 3rd place. So at the moment we're looking at the big question mark: can Commodore win this Castrol 400, or will Mazda RX-7, or will BMW 635? Falcons at this stage seem to be out of it. Bluebird Turbos seem to be a long shot.
1.6 seconds separates Alan Grice from Alan Moffat, 2.99 seconds from Moffat back to Peter Brock.
As Laurie Nelson goes through in front of Chris Gibson, that's the gap. In the 3 litre class, absolutely together, Murray Carter tucked in behind. The Andrew Harris Falcon and then Jim Richards. Now with John Harvey on him, but a pit stop under Harvey's belt, so he's dropped quite a lot of time.
In fact, a lap.
This car, the black JPS BMW, running much better than we've seen it run previously. At Amaru Park, it ran on Sandown type gearing. The quiet New Zealander was fairly happy with its progress there. Most capable driver, Jim Richards. Of course, he partnered Peter Brock to 3 James Hardy victories. And quite a dab hand at rallying as well.
Here comes Moffat. And Grice holds the lead, but only just.
Wants to lean on him.
Oh! Grice slams back into the lead. This is the stuff that 5-lap sprints are made out of, not 130-lap events.
And remember, this is the team that's hit each other with protest and counter-protest in the pit area yesterday. They've been fighting their battles off the track as well as on.
Both of these teams face after-race protesters. Now Moffat pulls out up the back straight. Let's see the power of the RX-7 now, and Moffat reveals the colours of the RX-7 and goes to the lead. And Grice locks up everything trying to catch him.
And you can see the smoke over there from here, and Grice is out. Has he blown something? That's the end of it for Alan Grice. Well, that car was automatically to be scrutineered at the end of the race today. It was a pull down because of the points protested against it by the Peter Stuyvesant team, but no need for that now.
So now Alan Moffat is the leader of the race and clearly over Peter Brock. after 21 laps.
6.4 seconds separates Moffat. Coming up to now lap his teammate, Greg Hansford,
So this,
after only 21 laps.
This is the fourth race leader that we've had. We had Dick Johnson very, very briefly, then Peter Brock, then Alan Grice, and now Alan Moffat. So we've had a Falcon in first gear, Commodore for most of the race, and now an RX-7 Mazda. And that means that in second place is Peter Brock, third place is Jim Richards, fourth place is Gary Rogers, and fifth place is Fred Gibson in the Bluebird Turbo.
Here comes Brock. Behind him, Grice parked.
And the more Brock sees people parking the front-running cars, people like Grice and Fury, the more sure he'll be, I'm certain, that he'll be happy in his own mind of the pace and the tactics that he's employing at the moment. Peter Brock behind Alan Moffat by 5.7 seconds.
Brock taking something of a risk this weekend. He's running on a new brand of tyre, Avon. They've built some tyres especially for the Holden dealer team as part of a development to see whether they want to enter motor racing in Australia. Brock was delighted with the tyres yesterday, said his pole position time on his Avon race tyres, was taking the opportunity today to see how they'll go over a long distance as he comes up now to lap Greg Hansford. And you must say that Hansford must have some sort of problems to be that far behind.
Yes, one wonders about Hansford's position. Brock, incidentally, his lead over third place Jim Richards is 17.2 seconds, so that's pulled out to quite a margin. A lock up. Left front, the wheel that gets light as you turn in on the corner, still under brakes. Brock suffered from that a bit. It was doing it at Amaroo, at the round there. Past the pit area again, and his crew now on lap 23, sorry, completing 23 on 24. Peter Brock in second place now, having let firstly Alan Grice and then Alan Moffat go through. Is he setting his own pace, or is he in some sort of a problem? Let's hear what he said to us earlier today in this interview.
You don't really know how to prepare yourself because you don't know what the weather's going to do.
That's exactly right, Drew. A quick shower of rain, say 20 minutes into the race, where the slicks really lose their grip and it becomes decidedly dicey to drive out there on smooth tyres, will mean the decision whether to soldier on or to come in the pits and go for something with a bit of a tread pattern on them. You know you're going to lose at least 30 seconds, plus 10 seconds getting in and 10 seconds out, and that's about 50 seconds. So you've got to be pretty sure it's going to stay raining or that you're losing a lot of time. Tactics are really what it's all about, I guess, on a day like this. And I'll be relying on Larry Perkins in the pits to, number one, know when I'm due to come in when it's too bad, and number two, to bolt the right tyres on. I've got time to tell him I want that compound and that tyre. He's going to say, right, it's not too wet, I'll put intermediates on, or it's pouring rain, here's a set of wets. So it's an interesting day, actually.
And so far the race has been run in dry conditions, so all the threat of tyre changes and wet weather hasn't materialised as yet.
Coming up to Scotty Taylor, Commodore from Wodonga. The Brock blasts through on the left-hand side of that, the right-hand side of another. Very busy, coming up to the Barry Jones Goodrich shod car. That's running on road-type tyres. The only car in the race so to be. And this is Fred Gibson, who at the moment is lying fifth. Problems
And he's being told to put it away by the looks of it.
Don't bother refueling, the pit crew said.
So a bad day for the Nissan team after two beautiful wins at Amaroo Park and Oran Park. Castrol 400 has not been kind to them.
Except that their new Pulsar Turbo has now moved into the lead in the 3-litre class. It's disposed of Laurie Nelson by about 5 seconds at this stage, and that's the car that's not even yet on the market.
Never
it's
ever
going to be released in the Bathurst week.
Never ever underestimate the power of a woman.
Laps completed, 104 remain. Alan Moffat leads by 1.5 seconds from Brock. Jim Richards is third. Gary Rogers is fourth. We still have that mix of makes. We have Mazda RX-7 from Commodore, from BMW, from another Commodore. That's the situation. They're on the 26th. We're not seeing the close scrapping that we anticipated from the lap times. We certainly don't know how pit stops and late fortunes later in the race will work out the situation between those very disparate motor cars in the first 3 placings. Terry Shieldy was 5th here last year. Hasn't got a lot of money. Hasn't yet got his 13B Mazda engine, so he's running the 12A. So on the doubling of capacity of the Kerrs with a Wankel engine, when they're taken from, because of the different way of rating the capacity, to a reciprocating engine, as Murray Carter passed by Jim Richards, and then they're doubled again for peripheral ported, so the 12A engine's rated at 4.4 litres and the 13B at 5.2. Jim Richards, though, is a mere 3.5 litres. It's a 6-cylinder overhead cam, but it has 4 valves per cylinder, which is the important concession that Cam's granted that car. It's always had independent suspension all round, which few of the other touring cars have, and it's got a 5-speed gearbox, which the big V8s don't have either, although the Bluebirds do, and the Mazdas do. Coming into its own for this race in the first qualifying session yesterday, which was fairly damp. Richards was the fastest of all cars at about 111. Some of the more fancied runners were down as low as about 118. 111 would have been a good dry weather time.
Jim Richards in 3rd place behind Moffat and Brock. Rogers in 4th, and Warren Cullen now up to 5th.
Yes, it was interesting. Look at those times of the cars that came out in that first session. Richards was 18.5, Marston 18.8, Rogers 18.9, Brock 19.3.
Richards driving the event solo today. Frank Gardner entered as his co-driver, will only drive in the midsection at the James Hardy 1000 at Bathurst. Alan Moffat goes through our camera viewpoint. Peter Brock.
The gap from those two is 2.3 seconds. Looking head on there at a car that's adjudged to be too wide. The scrutineers tell us this morning that all of the Mazdas, the flares have been incorrectly made, and they are in fact projecting further from the bodywork of the car than the CAMS regulations allow, and that is to be reviewed before the next Endurance Championship race.
The flares are allowed to be 5 centimetres wider than the bodywork on each side of the motor car, but the Mazda flares give an extra 1 centimetre of width to the motor car, and that's what CAMS is upset about.
As we look there at the 3-litre class placings, confirming that Chris Gibson has moved ahead of Laurie Nelson to lead the class. And will the weather change? And in fact, it is rain over in the back area. So we've had a fair deal of rewriting of the script with more than 100 laps of the race remaining. And that rain doesn't have to move very far at all for it to produce pit area confusion, perhaps in a few minutes' time. Peter McLeod. Laurie Nelson is taken by Chris Gibson and then Moffat, the race leader.
And see how far back Brock has dropped on that lap, back to 3.93 seconds, in fact. Now, it could be traffic. We need to look at a couple of laps in unison to be able to tell, but the lead between Brock and Moffat has been fluctuating between 1.9 and 2.3. Suddenly it's open an extra second and a half.
Well, this race was decided last year after the event was actually run through protests and so on. The width of Moffat's car, could the same thing happen this year?
No, it's been allowed and okay to run. All the Mazdas are the same. The flares, whether scrutiny is not sure whether they're made by Mazda in Japan or made out here, but they're all the same, and they're all allowed to run without further problems for this race, but it has to be reviewed for later races. Alan Moffat qualified at an 11.5 in the second practice session. Let's see what he's doing now. In the third practice session yesterday, when he put himself onto fourth grid position, he was actually on an 11.2. Let's see him on his 30th lap in a race, therefore, that now has less than 199 remaining. Let's see what sort of time he's doing.
Brock fights back to within 3 point, there's Brock there, to within 3.2 seconds of Moffat now.
And 23 seconds back to Jim Richards. Still Gary Rogers fourth. Fifth place is Warren Cullen in 22, and sixth place in 50 is Peter McLeod in that Mazda RX-7. Minus 1 lap, seventh, John Harvey. But Moffat, the man who speared his way through cars slowing down last year, after they'd finished their 108 lap race, Moffat went on to do his 109th lap and then stood on the doorsill of the car, arms raised in victory, V-finger sign, and appeal to the crowd.
Lap time for Alan Moffat at 1 minute 13.59 seconds. That's 1.1 seconds outside his sprint lap record, but an excellent time for this stage of the race.
But a long way off the 10.7s that the fastest three cars recorded in qualifying. You can see that when things settle down in the race, with big fuel loads on, different compound tyres, which are made to run much longer than are needed for qualifying, then the times drop quite considerably.
Brock through Castrol curve that time round really seemed to have a lot of understeer up. You can see his arms uncharacteristically in an awkward angle on the steering wheel. Brock was yesterday having difficulty with understeer in the motor car, and it could well be afflicting him even now.
As he goes past the 3-litre class leader, that's sort of a drop in time from a 10.7 at 158 kilometres an hour average speed to a 13.5 is a drop of over 6.5 kilometres an hour average all around the track. Gap 3.4. First to this man second. Chris Gibson with the Pulsar walking around a bit under brakes. It's a quick yet light car. Chris is finding it takes some controlling. She's the second car in the picture there.
It's not actually under brakes only. It seemed to have been walking around down the straight. So certainly the experimenting that the Nissan team has been doing with the aerofoil is not working too well at the moment. Neil Crompton is in the pits.
It's been a very busy time down here in the pits for the start of the 1983 Castrol 400. Out of the event so far, Dick Johnson with clutch problems, David Parsons with head gasket trouble after he blew a radiator hose off the Commodore, Steve Masterton also with radiator hose trouble, he's out of the event. Rusty French has got problems with the Commodore, stuck out on the circuit somewhere. George Fury and Fred Gibson, what a disappointment for the Nissan team, both with turbo trouble, their cars parked back into the pit area. Alan Grice, we believe, with engine failure on the circuit. John Harvey pitted briefly with a front tyre problem. In fact, it was flat. They've replaced it. He's circulating once again. And Jim Keogh apparently hit the fence over the back part of the course. That car has now been repaired and has joined the race. We'll be back here shortly with more updated news from the pits.
And if that cloud that we saw over the back of the grandstand arrives, he might be pretty busy there soon, Neil, in the pits.
Brock. Brock has hit something. That is Peter Brock, and he has slowed right down. As Chrissy Gibson comes through, but there it is. Peter Brock has had a big crash, either against a car or against the fence through Castrol Curve. He hit the fence apparently at Castrol Curve, and Peter Brock is limping to the pits.
Well, you'd have to have a very, very good memory indeed to be able to cite another occasion on which Peter Brock has done that.
1981, well, he hit a car, of course, in 1981 at Bathurst, early in the event.
Oran Park, he damaged the car slightly, but he's going to park it over near Alan Grice, is he?
No, just taking the quick way around. In fact, it was 1980 that he damaged the car at Bathurst, but went on to win anyway with a magnificent drive back.
And Jim Richards, as he goes through, now takes second place. The BMW up into second place. The black car that really was not on the pace at Oran Park or the first round at Amaroo.
Sensation on lap 32 for Peter Brock, the man they call Peter Perfect.
So it's now Mazda RX-7 leads BMW. Commodore Brock third, but soon will be displaced by Rogers. Then Warren Cullen. And then car 50, Peter McLeod. Brock's teammate John Harvey down a lap and therefore in sixth place at this stage.
Gary Rogers goes past to take third.
As Brock now heads for the pits. Will time his pit stop.
But he's already wasted a lot of time.
This, of course, takes the heat right off Alan Moffat. He's gone way past his pit. He's rolled past the pit. He may well have a brake problem as well.
That's probably it.
Larry Perkins at the front of the motor car, and Brock's out of the vehicle. You'd almost say that it'd have to be it.
Yes, because that's perhaps why he drove straight on in the S's, as well as having the accident originally. So we might find when they get the front wheels off that we're looking for a brake problem. And Brock's out of the car saying, why couldn't I pull up? Find out more about it. I want this problem solved. I want to know more about it in terms of this race, but also in terms of Bathurst.
Well, if he can't pull up at that speed in the pits, it'd be certainly dangerous around at race speed.
John Harvey, his teammate, presently sixth, is also travelling slowly to the pits. In a moment, the Marlborough Holden dealer team will have two cars in there. There's Harvey. Puncture right front. Can't see it there. Now you can. Well, poor old John Harvey. Why does he run into so much bad luck? Things which are, in many cases, genuine bad luck. Suddenly the crew wake up. Boys, clear it.
They push Brock away because Brock recognises the fact that his car is now out of service, but maybe he can get Harvey back in the event.
They also know they have to move Brock's car sufficiently to let Harvey get round him, as we've got the clock now on Harvey's stop.
He takes a security 20-litre churn of fuel, and you always do that when you come in. And Brock looks like he's going to replace John Harvey.
Oh, what a good idea, said Peter. How fortuitous.
That's Phil Brock. Yeah, that's Phil Brock around with the motor car.
Larry Perkins.
No, that's Phil Brock in the pit, so it is Peter Brock in the motor car.
Strapping him in.
And away goes Peter Brock in car 25. Lying one lap down on Alan Moffat, the leader. And Jim Richards almost hits him. Brock's so anxious to get out of the pits that he pulls out in front of the BMW.
I'm not sure that you can't prove he didn't hit him. But Jim Richards is 33.7 seconds in arrears to Alan Moffat. It is holding second place. Third place, 9.5 seconds further back, is Gary Rogers. Warren Cullen is fourth. Peter McLeod is fifth. This car, until it pitted, John Harvey's car was sixth. Get you an update on that in a moment as we go down to John Harvey in the pits.
John Harvey in the pits very early with a flat tyre. You've just come back in and changed over with Peter Brock. What happened?
Well, in the first instance, the first flat tyre, I was running along pretty smoothly. Jim Keogh apparently had an accident with somebody. I come across him with his deranged, running on three wheels, trying to get back to the pits. I slowed up, waved to people behind me to slow down because I could see what was happening. And then at about 15k, he lost it on the bridge there, just before the main straight, and I couldn't avoid him. He spun right in front of me. I knocked my speed right off. Unfortunately, the mudguard or something damaged the tyre, which resulted in a pit stop. The second one was just a case of picking up debris on the track left from all the accidents. I don't know where I picked it up, but it's been going flat for about 10 laps.
John, what about the condition of the race so far? It looks like the pace is fairly hot out there.
Oh yeah, well, I mean the car was just lurking along fine. I was quite happy with the car apart from picking up debris. I mean I tried to avoid it at every instant, but there's glass and fiberglass and everything lying out there. I was just unlucky, I guess.
So now Peter Brock is in car 25, John Harvey's car. And you've got to say that that was a bit fortunate for Peter Brock that the flat tyre happened to John Harvey just when he was in the pits.
Brock thought it was just marvellous. And this is the race leader. His lead 34 seconds over Jim Richards. In fact, it's gone out to a 35.9. But the gap second to third, that's Richards to Gary Rogers, has come down from 9.5 to 7.8. So Rogers hauling Jim Richards.
And this is the race between Richards and Brock. And Brock unable to take over the BMW down the main straight.
And 2 laps down to it, of course. 2 pit stops for that Commodore. And Richards not too keen to wave it through. He's got his own problems. No problem with the car, but his problems in terms of maintaining station and not losing pace. And should Brock not circulate very much quicker in front of him, well, then Jim Richards wouldn't like it, because the hindrance to him, perhaps in picking lines, breaking points and so on, would not suit him. Interesting that at the moment, Brock doesn't seem to be able to get John Harvey's car to lap as quickly as he was getting his own to lap. Race situation, 37 laps there, as we show, and the leaders, in fact, now completed 39. And Brock goes through, then Richards goes deep, helped a bit by traffic.
And the first sign that there may be a bit of rain with Brock with the windscreen wipers going.
BMW looks nice and stable under brakes there by comparison with John Harvey's car. Brock at the wheel. Look at the sky up above.
Wind gusting.
Not only the papers flying, but the cars as well. Pace quite unabated at this stage. Richards now 8.1 seconds in front of Gary Rogers. Gary Rogers 7th in the race last year. Richards 10th in the BMW. What a turn-up so early in this endurance race as Brock goes down the inside of him again, and this time gets a much better run, and surely it's been an interesting comparison between the number 2 Holden dealer team car and the BMW. Makes certain of it, but Richards, by gee, still forcing him. Former teammates, former James Hardy winners together. And the usual great respect that there is between 2 drivers of such a caliber. Ultimate trust. And in fact would be enjoying the scrap, although as I say, I think Richards on a slightly different mission to Brock, 2 laps in arrears. Would be pleased not to have the hindrance of Brock close to him at this stage. If Brock wants to drop behind or go forward, he wouldn't mind as long as he does it decisively.
The under 3 litre class is led by Christine Gibson in the new Nissan Pulsar, from Laurie Nelson in the V6 Capri, and Joe Beninka in the Alfa Romeo.
And up into 6th place outright comes in car number 18, Murray Carter. So that Brock, 2 laps down, is now in 8th place. Let's recap the situation from Moffat, Jim Richards, Gary Rogers, in 22, Warren Cullen. 50, Peter McLeod. Down a lap, 6th place, Murray Carter. 7th place then is 42, Greg Hansford. And 8th place then is Brock, 25. So the next target for Brock is Greg Hansford in car 42, both of them 2 laps down. That's Gary Rogers, he's 3rd, and he's now 7.1 seconds from 9.5 about 6 laps ago. He's 7.1 behind Jim Richards, and he is a very good steerer indeed, Gary Rogers. This is in Clive Benson Brown's car, the Disco owner from Tasmania, who is nowhere near as quick as Gary, and indeed is not as committed to motor racing as Rogers. Rogers has driven sports sedans and touring cars very successfully. Doesn't drive a lot. Qualified 5th in this race last year, 10th this year. But can do very well indeed, so could well feature later on. Laps completed. Coming up, they're on their 43rd. The race distance 129, and rain just sprinkling. So pits, including Alan Moffat's, ready for an unexpected stop, because if the driver comes in early to go for wet weather rubber, he'll also of course want the fuel stop done, and to make it his only stop.
Moffat survived a protest yesterday about the size of his fuel tank. In fact, the STP roadway teams had protested that Moffat had a reserve fuel tank in his motor car that could well take the total capacity of the vehicle above the 130 litres allowed.
Behind Moffat, holding 1st place, is his teammate Hansford in 7th place, and Hansford's just 6 seconds in front of Peter Brock, who's 8th. So the Stuyvesant team, one of the few 2-car teams in this event that are still intact. The Nissan team is 2 of their 3 cars are parked. One of the 2 Marlborough Holden dealer team cars parked.
Both of the STP roadway cars are out of the event.
There's plenty of money lying very idle around the Sandown circuit at the moment. There you see the remaining Nissan, but class leader, and that's vital to them. They wanted to finish not only this race literally by any means, but also at Bathurst, because that is really part of the introduction of the motor car to the public. Within a few weeks, you'll be able to buy a turbocharged front-wheel drive Nissan Pulsar Coupe.
The leader of the Castrol 400 comes up to lap the leader of the 3-litre class, Christine Gibson.
Gary Rogers goes out to 7.9 in arrears to Jim Richards. Rogers 3rd, Richards 2nd. This man 37.6 seconds in front of Richards in his race lead on his 44th lap.
And there's Hansford in the pits, taking his refuelling stop, putting in Gary Walden, the new find for the Moffat Peter Stuyvesant Mazda team. Greg Hansford out of the motor car, and Gary Walden, who started racing only 2.5 years ago, now in the motor car for his debut race.
Which means Peter Brock is now 7th. Car 25 will have moved up to 7th because he was only 6 seconds behind him. And team leader, Moffat, goes by not very far in front of Walden.
Walden has had only a very few laps in this motor car.
Chris Gibson through there, Craig Bradkey in the Celica behind.
Walden John is anything but confident about the motor car and about his ability to be able to drive it. He's only ever driven series production cars before. Started with a TR7 2 years ago, moved to a production RX7 this year, and came second in the Goodyear Stallion Stable Series at Amaroo Park. But this is his first drive in a real racing car. He will discuss with Alan Moffat tomorrow the possibilities of him co-driving with Greg Hansford in the James Hardie 1000. But the decision has to be a joint one. Walden has to feel that he too is confident that he can do justice to the motor car on the daunting Mount Panorama circuit. Chrissy Gibson in the lead in the under 3 litre class. Walden not heading for the pits, but because of his unfamiliarity with the car, still looking for the indicator stalk.
We've got Brock in 7th place overall, and in fact the man he's next aiming for is car 24, Scotty Taylor, Kevin Kennedy. And he's very close to him at the moment. He's just passed him, so Brock is now up into 6th place. Let's go down again to the pit area.
Greg Hansford in the second of the Stuyvesant Mazdas. You're performing very well so far. I'm one of the few drivers not to get caught up in all of the drama.
Yeah, well, that was the plan for me, to keep out of everyone's road for the first 30 laps, and which I did successfully.
Greg, yesterday you're a little bit disappointed that you couldn't get onto the hot pace early enough in the 3 sessions that you had. Now that you've had a chance to settle into the groove, how does it feel out there?
The track's really slippery. There's oil all over the track and parts of cars lying all over the place. But other than that, I feel all right, and I just needed more practice, and we only had, I think, 15 laps in practice. So.
Greg, are you planning to get back into the car, or would you like Gary to run right through now to the flag?
I think I'll get back in. Having a few problems selecting gears, so I'll get back in the car. And we'll be out there for 30 laps, I think, so a fair while yet.
Okay, good luck.
So only 3 cars now on the same lap: Moffat, Richards and Rogers. And there's the race leader, Alan Moffat.
His gap going out to 38.2 seconds over Richards, whose gap to Gary Rogers is 7.4 seconds. And now it's in fact 6.4, so Gary Rogers continues to haul in the BMW. Down 1 lap, Warren Cullen 4th, Peter McLeod 5th, and Peter Brock 6th. Keogh, Terry Shield, Alan Moffat, Joe Maninka 3rd in the 3 litre class. Across the start-finish line goes Warren Cullen. Aims himself at our cameraman and then turns to the cameraman's right into Yellow Terror corner, which is a bit of a commentator's terror. And our lap scorer seems to be undecided about Mr. Cullen's position in the field at this stage, as they're throwing tiles in all directions. We had Warren Cullen in 4th place. A lap down and in front of Peter McLeod. Cullen, the man that first got Alan Jones back into Australian motor racing, teaming with him at Bathurst a couple of years ago, and started Jones on a wild spree of teaming up in all sorts of cars with all sorts of people. In a very short time, he went from Commodore to Falcon to Mazda RX-7, pulled by all sorts of transporters. He aligned himself with quite a lot of factories. But let's go down to the pit area.
the STP team has been in all sorts of strife today, and Stephen Harrington from Tasmania, your car out very early in the piece.
Yes, it was, Neil. We had a bit of bad luck. We're not quite sure what happened at the present time, but it looks like we've broken something in the right-hand front suspension, and I've put it in.
Stephen, considering the fact that the cars are circulating the track so quickly, do you think that now that we've got these additional parts on the cars and they are going so quickly that it's providing strain on other bits and pieces and therefore we're having failures?
No, I don't believe that's the case, Neil. Both my problem and Alan's problem was something that could happen now or even 12 months ago. I don't think it has any bearing.
The dice in the race at this stage is between second and third, as the gap between Richards in the black BMW and Gary Rogers in the black Holden Commodore comes down now to 5.8 seconds from 9.5 a while ago. That's the man being chased. Laurie Nelson in behind him, running second in the under 3 litre class.
And Richard's really the only uncontroversial car in the race this weekend. He's the only one on whom a protest hasn't been entered or hasn't protested anyone himself. In fact, Frank Gardner, the team manager, as we put the clock on Richards for one flying lap, Frank Gardner, team manager, even requested that his pit area be moved away from the other leading pits because he said they were making too much noise with their arguing.
He also begged Cams not to give us any more rule changes. He said we can't afford them. 6.4 the gap, Richards to Rogers as they came across the start-finish line on lap 51. Sorry, they're not. Yes, they're on lap 51. Lead at 50.
And our lap scorer now tells us that, in fact, Cullen is on the same lap as the 3 leaders in 4th place. Second, still about 38 seconds behind the race leader, Alan Moffat.
Richard's capable of potentially making a lightning fast pit stop as well. He has a central lock hub on each wheel, so the team only has to undo one big nut in the centre rather than 4 or 5 studs as they do on the other cars.
$1:14.89 for the lap, Jim Richards.
That was the lap, and the gap is 5.7. Down, down it comes. Joe Beninka third in the 3 litre class, tucked in behind. Red Alpha.
And Rogers has him in his sights.
The man in third, chasing. 5.7 seconds is the gap. Good steady race being run by Rogers. The big question mark is whether the car owner, Clive Benson-Brown, will get in to do some of the driving. If he does, he will be considerably slower than Gary Rogers. Gary Rogers, one of the men in the 5-car melee at McPhillamy Park at Bathurst in the race that was cut short by a quarter race distance. His was one of the cars that was fairly well annihilated in that accident, running very well at the time.
He was running with Benson-Brown in that year as well. Then last year, Benson-Brown teamed with Charlie O'Brien. O'Brien now committed to Formula Pacific racing, and in fact in Canada this weekend, racing in a Formula Mondial event.
5.9 seconds the gap. That's what he's looking for. And there you can see the 2 cars. Onto the brakes, the big, fairly old-fashioned iron V8 in the front of the Commodore. By comparison with a light, independently sprung, only 3.5 litre straight 6 BMW in front of it. Similar weight to the Commodore, a few kgs heavier. BMW, after originally by Cams being forced to be 1,430 kilos or something, some 200 kilos heavier than it now is allowed to be. But an extra gear ratio, independent rear suspension, big brakes, but 1.5 litres less than the car that's chasing it at the moment. And the little ankle rotary engine powered car. It seems to be the bane of all other touring cars because it works so well. Rogers, I think now, I'll check it, is about 5 seconds behind. Yes, confirmation, so he's pulled nearly a second that time. Lap 54. A little Mitsubishi Colt tucked in behind there. One of the least powerful cars in the race, perhaps only 110, 115 horsepower, although they hope next year to go to homologated turbocharging for the car.
Gary Walden in the second of the Mazda RX-7s, about to be dealt with by Gary Rogers. Waves him through. Rogers doesn't wait for a second invitation.
Richards to Rogers, 5.8 on that occasion.
There's the gap. Alan Moffat back to Jim Richards, 42 seconds. And Moffat would be thanking his lucky stars, I would think, that bad luck has befallen both the Marlborough Holden dealer team and the Dick Johnson equip, because he had anticipated that a lot more pressure than this would be on him at this stage of the event.
Laurie Nelson, Alan Moffat. Alan, who'd been laid low by a virus and says he's still not 100%. Left the Peter Stuyvesant team representation at Warren Park in the second round of the Endurance Champion entirely to his second driver, Greg Hansford. Back for this one.
Moffat is to be congratulated for the way in which he's found potential young drivers and given them a start in one of the country's fastest touring cars. Firstly with Greg Hansford, and now with Gary Walden.
Gary Walden's lap that time was a 1:17. Incidentally, what's happened to Peter Brock? Did I hear you ask? He's in 7th place at this stage, some 37.8 seconds in arrears to Murray Carter in 6th. Taylor Kennedy were overtaken by Brock, now falling a little further back.
Moffat driving solo in the Castrol 400, but to share his drive in the James Hardy 1000 with his partner from last year, Yoshi Katayama. Katayama, of course, the winner of the junior class in this year's Le Mans 24-hour race in a streamlined Mazda, but still using basically the same engine to that which Moffat's using here today. As we watch Peter Brock in car 25.
We saw Murray Carter in the previous shots, so Murray's about, as we said, 37.8 seconds in front of Brock. Brock holding 7th at this stage. It's come down to 36.7, so he's hauling Carter fairly effectively. After he deals with Carter in 18, he has Peter McLeod in 50, Warren Cullen in 22, Gary Rogers 11, Jim Richards 31, and Alan Moffat 43 if he aspires to win the race. If he so does, he's on the, well, the race leader's on the 58th lap, having completed 57. That's 129. 71 remain.
And if you've just joined the telecast late and you hear us talking about Peter Brock, there he is in car 25, not 05. Brock hit the fence with car 5, lived around into the pits. While he was in the pits, teammate John Harvey came in with a puncture, and Peter Brock got in Harvey's car, and that's why Brock is in car 25, still running.
Brock going to the pits.
Yep.
this is unexpected from Peter Brock on lap 57 of the 129 lap Castrol 400. Now the car's been filled with fuel, so he certainly doesn't need that. But it appears to be a regulation pit stop as the very efficient Marlborough Holden dealer team brings in 120-litre churn of fuel, then the second coming up and doing a 4-tyre change. Fuel stop over, only taken 2 churns, 40 litres, the potential 130. Larry Perkins at the door. Larry Perkins to share the drive with Brock in the James Hardy 1000 and co-winner of the James Hardy 1000 last year with Brock. 30 seconds so far gone, as you can see from our...
He's done 22 laps in that car, Harvey having pitted it on lap 36.
38.99 seconds, not bad for the Marlborough Holden dealer team. Not as quick as Nissan would have done it, around about 20 to 25 seconds. But when you consider that the hard work that the Marlborough Holden dealer team already has had to do today, that's not bad.
Saw Peter Brock lining up on Murray Carter, a man that normally he'd be able to lap much faster than. But of course that second pit stop has really mucked things up. Remember, Murray Carter at Oran Park was the only car virtually of the major final place winners that didn't make a pit stop. That was a thing that surprised some teams, but Murray Carter didn't, so he can go a long time on one tank, as we see Free limping down the straight. It's the Les Gross car, I think.
No, it's this. Yes, you're right, it is.
56.
John Craft and Don Smith.
Immediately behind Peter Brock, according to our lap scorers, is Terry Shield in 37. Both of them 2 laps down, and this is the race leader. His lead is 44 seconds. The gap from Richards, second place behind him, and that 44 seconds behind, to Rogers chasing him from 3rd position is 5 seconds now, 4.9. Turbo still leading the 3-litre class from car 59, Rory Nelson. Car 64 is now up into 3rd place in the class. Jim Lyle, Peter Engelhardt, Mazda RX-7, number 64. And so the link for Alpha 69 goes to 4th. The gap from 2nd to 3rd is now 4 seconds. That's Murray Carter you saw there, the car that Brock needed to attack to move up a placing. And still, actually, we have him as the next car in front of Brock, despite the pit stop, but the margin, of course, has gone out to nearly a full lap.
Deals with the class leader once again. So that's double lap now for Christine Gibson. Second place, Jim Richards through. And here comes 3rd position. 4.77 seconds the gap. Back to Gary Rogers, who's working the Commodore.
There's the under 3-litre class situation with the race leader completing 61 and on his 62nd lap, and the race in 1 second time, an hour and a quarter old.
And Jim Richards locked right up the back of the Peter McLeod Mazda RX-7 and looking for a way through.
McLeod in 5th place, Richards a lap in front in 2nd. Remember the charge by Graham Bailey, 2nd round at Oran Park, when the They knew they had damper trouble in the car, so they put on some soft compound tyres, a light fuel load, and sent it out as a real hare. And boy, did it ever work, carrying all the front runners, going very quickly indeed.
Looks for a moment to fight back and then decides not to as the gap opens between Richards and the third place car to 5.6 seconds.
So you can see there the intent between Richards and his teammate in the pits, or it's his team manager and co-driver at Bathurst, Frank Gardner, and that is that they don't want Gary Rogers to go by them. They regard that as fairly essential, that they stay where they are, so they're prepared to force along if Rogers gets closer than about 4 seconds, or to within 4 seconds.
And while Richards has the job of holding off Rogers, Moffat gets away from him. His gap is up to close to 48 seconds now.
So who's going to catch Alan Moffat? Consider the practice times. Jim Richards, a 1:11.7, 1 second slower than the three who recorded a 10.7, Brock, Johnson and Price. Alan Moffat finally accredited, starting from 6th grid position, with an 11.5, so there was only 0.2 of a second in it, but an 11.2 in his third session when he was running front tyres that stuck out from the under the mud guards, which they're not allowed to protrude beyond the width of the wheel arch flares. And in fact, some of the other teams say that makes his car turn in considerably less well. And there is Gary Rogers
in the pits.
Fuel
Not a smoke from the front brakes.
The man in third place, 5.6 seconds behind Richards when he went in. Richards gets about 6.5 miles to the gallon out of the BMW. The Commodores are probably around Sandown, around 4.5, perhaps 5 miles per gallon.
Rogers remains in the motor car. Clive Brenson Brown elects not to get into it.
Yep. Gary Rogers out again, and still in third, because the man who would take the place from him is Warren Cullen in fourth. He is a lap down, or we've got a revision of that.
Rogers' pit stop took 42 seconds, incidentally.
So Rogers goes to being a lap down to the leader, and the leader is Alan Moffat there with his indicator on. Is he going to the pits? One of the advantages of fuel injection in this car is that he's moved to the, well, from the very outside of the track, but is the improved fuel consumption, and the Moffat, or the Mazdas, expected around 6 miles per gallon in carburettor form, and the rumour is they might be up to as much as 9 miles per gallon with fuel injection. So Alan Moffat really could perhaps go a long time. That's the crew that await his arrival, and as you can see, they consider that it's imminent. A real bearded character there, Mick Webb, who was mechanic for Bibb Stillwell many years ago.
There's Alan Moffat. Peter Brock behind had just picked up a lap, or at least passed Gary Walden in the Mazda RX-7, the second of the Peter Stuyvesant cars. There's Brock behind Moffat. Lying in 7th position, 2 laps behind the flying Alan Moffat.
Still
and catching him quickly. And this time Moffat pulls across, out of Brock's way, and goes for the pits, and it's going to be one of those lightning fast stops. Now Moffat last year lost 2 minutes in penalties because he sped in pit lane. The officials will be watching him very closely this year.
And this is exactly half race distance.
And the clock starts. Mick Webb, team manager, stands back, watches the action of his boy, speaks to the boss. Left-hand drive motor car. It's taken 1 churn of fuel so far. Fuel's already in.
The BMW comes down the yellow terror corner. We'll see it flash past in the background there. And when he does, he's the new race leader. There he goes. Jim Richards in the BMW leads the Castrol 400. The car wouldn't start. It was a 36-second pit stop. It still hasn't started.
And the push start is an automatic 1-minute penalty.
Jim Richards leads.
48 seconds. Come on, Moffat.
Imagine that crew.
It's away.
Imagine Alan Moffat.
Take the 55 pit stops and add 1 minute to it, because that's the penalty that Alan Moffat has incurred, almost certainly, for push starting his motor car.
So we said before the race started it could well be decided in the pits. And a big change in fortunes then for Alan Moffat.
Let's go down to the pits to find out more from Neil Crompton.
Alan Horsley, team manager for the Stuyvesant Mazda team. Problems then with Alan Moffat's pit stop?
Yes, we had a problem with restarting it there. I'm not sure what's wrong. Maybe it's something to do with the fuel injection. But we didn't lose too much time.
How does that place Alan in the race now, having to push start the car?
That's okay. We're allowed to push start in the pits. There's no problem there. We were 45 seconds in front of that stop, so we may still be right.
I noticed you didn't change any wheels on the car. Tyres in good shape?
Apparently so, yes.
Well, he's certainly not in the lead. Alan Moffat. Jim Richards leads the Castrol 400 on lap 66. He took the lead. It's lap 67 now. Alan Moffat lies second. We have Gary Rogers third, Warren Cullen fourth. And we reckon, in fact, although the lap scorers tell us that it's that way round, we reckon it's Cullen third and 22, Rogers fourth and 11. Peter McLeod fifth and 50 as a car limps up the main straight, and it could be the Beninka Alpha, I think. And it's not, yes it is, and it's third in class, fourth in class. It slipped to fourth from third and come to a complete halt.
In a pretty dangerous position on the track too, I might say.
Warren Cullen into the pits. He's in third place, we reckon, in front of Gary Rogers fourth, Peter McLeod fifth, Carter sixth, Brock seventh, Shield eighth, Hansford ninth, but Cullen for pit crew attention. Lap for him 67.
Cullen to hand over to Ron Harrop, formerly a Holden dealer team co-driver at the James Hardy 1000. With John Harvey.
But not getting in, taking his helmet off and helping the driver.
No, the change has happened. That's Harrop in the motor car and Cullen out.
And Richards in the meantime leads by 25 seconds. Harrop now in car 22, which was in third place when it pitted, and it's an agonizingly long stop, dreadfully long.
And Harrop reflects his frustration as he leaves the pits.
Funny how these races never go to plan. The excitement that you imagine is going to be there, that I imagined was going to be in this one, certainly didn't fall in the way that I foresaw, but there's plenty of it still. And it revolves around this man's, the inability of the Moffat Mazda's engine to restart, leaving him now 23.5 seconds in arrears to Jim Richards. But he's pulled that from 25.2, only a lap and a bit ago. And we're on lap 69, 60 laps remaining, so not much past half distance, so every chance he can haul the race leader, Jim Richards. So Moffat still second place. Third place is Rogers now, without any question, because he hasn't pitted. Peter McLeod is fourth. Murray Carter is fifth. Warren Cullen sixth. Those four are 1 lap down, and 2 laps down then is Peter Brock, Terry Shield, Greg Hansford, and we go down to Neil Crompton.
Warren Cullen, a very hot and busy time out on the course at the moment by the look of it.
Yeah, certainly hard work out there. There's a lot of oil and rubber on the circuit, as you can well imagine by the stage of the race.
Did you notice any of the drama that was taking place in the opening laps, Warren?
Oh, I could see a little bit of the spoilers and things flying in the air. There seem to be a lot of vehicles up all over the circuit, but when you're out there, you worry about your own and you don't get too concerned with the rest.
How is your car performing?
Oh, we're delighted. It's a credit to my crew. They only finished it on Friday night. It's a brand new car and it's just performing like, you wouldn't believe it. I'm more than pleased with it.
And in the meantime, Christine Gibson, the leader of the under 3 litre class, has been in the pits, and out she goes. And nearly getting in the way.
Obviously a 3 litre Capri steaming, looking, or is it the Craig Bradkey Toyota Celica, which is car number 62. Jim Richards, the race leader, coming into the pit area with Moffat only 21 seconds in arrears. This a planned pit stop, of course. Remember, only 1 lock nut on the wheels. It should be a quickie, but equally it will put Moffat into the lead as Moffat goes down the Yellow Terra corner. He is within 100 metres of taking back the race lead, Alan Moffat. There he is, the new race leader. Again, Jim Richards stationary there in the pits beside, or while Moffat goes through. There's Richards. So, brief glory out in front for the JPS BMW, but nevertheless, a much, much more promising showing this weekend than we've seen for it at any other time. And this is only its 3rd outing this year. It didn't start any of the touring car rounds. Richards away and will hold. Will he hold? Will he hold second place? Because Gary Rogers will appear at Yellow Terra corner as Richards comes by, and he's not very far behind him, Gary Rogers. So after the pit stops, as Hansford looms into view, the situation between second place Richards and Gary Rogers, 3rd place, is different by only perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, as we see then Rogers.
I've just been to check with the clerk of the course on the Alan Moffat push start, and it appears that he does not incur a 1-minute penalty. It is not written into the supplementary regulations. Cars only need to start on their starter motor at the start of the race, but they can push start in the pits.
The gap, second Richards to 3rd Rogers, 10.4 now. It was 5 when it broke up when Rogers first pitted.
But Richards had a faster pit stop than Alan Moffat, and so now that they've both pitted, the gap between 1st and 2nd is less than it was.
And yet Rogers' pit stop took him 42 seconds and Richards took 33, 9 seconds better. Peter McLeod is 4th, 1 lap down.
And Moffat looking for a way through him, and gets it.
A 30-year-old Wollongong car dealer, Peter McLeod, very intense in his racing, only a couple of odd years experience, but has raced an enormous amount in that time. As the Alpha is being pushed along the straight, and we go back down to the pit area.
Gardner, a routine stop for Jim Richards?
Yeah, just a routine stop, 2 churns of fuel and 4 tyres.
Notice you had a good look at the tyres after Jim had taken away from the pit area. How do they look?
Well, due to the odd sort of practice sessions, we never really got around to evaluating just how much wear we did have. So we were just playing it a little bit safe, so that's why we changed the 4. We would have got away with 2, actually.
A few ominous clouds starting to build up over the pit areas. I can see you're preparing wets at the moment, just in case.
That's about time to get ready for another tyre change. We need to practice.
Thanks, Brent.
29.53 seconds separates Alan Moffat from Jim Richards on lap 71 of the Castrol 400.
Richards, who won Bathurst in '79 and in 1980 with Rock.
they both pitted, the margin between first and second, Moffat to Richards, was up towards 50 seconds, and now it's under 30.
As unscheduled comes in the Gary Rogers Roadways, rather Soundwaves car. It's Rogers in the vehicle, and this is an unscheduled stop. He took his scheduled pit stop only a short time ago. Rogers 1 lap down in 3rd position.
Have a look at the face that's borne the strain of 73 laps of racing up in a major place, and you can see how taxing it is. It's taxing physically. They can lose quite a lot of weight. You might think they're just sitting there, but mentally and physically the effort is enormous.
But this time there's no rush from the pit crew. It's obviously something that's fairly major, so 3rd place changes. Gary Rogers drops from contention as car 50. The Peter McLeod Graham Bailey Mazda RX-7, the Slick 50 car, comes up into 3rd position, 1 lap behind.
And what that means is that we don't have a V8 in 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th place. The first V8 is 5th, Warren Cullen, 2 laps down. Mazda, BMW, Mazda are the major placings. Ray Cutchy, Mike Quinn in the Bob Holden Motors car, and Ken Harrison's car number 80. But Bob Holden, an absolute stalwart in Australian motor racing, been racing over 30 years. Alan Moffat, of course, restarted his, well, he started his racing in Australia at Sandown at Lotus Cortina back in 1964. Specialised in 3-wheeling and sometimes 2-wheeling the car on the tighter corners as he blasts past Chris Gibson. And let's go down again, though, to Neil Crompton in the pit area.
Gary Rogers' car in the pits, as you can see, and there's all sorts of steam and smoke billowing out of the car. It appears as though they've got some sort of an overheating problem. The crew at the moment evaluating, and we'll let you know as soon as we can.
Greg Hansford, who in 42 is lying 8th. Well, of course, Gary Walden driving the car at the moment.
And
Jones
coming up the straight. And Gary Rogers is out of the motor car, and that's it for the 3rd placed vehicle.
Very, very bad luck after a very good drive. Well paced, looked after the car. You might say so with the car expired. But Gary Rogers did a very good job there. I suspect we're going to hear from him in just a moment as Jim Keogh goes by. Peter Brock. It's bad luck. One sympathises with Rogers. And let's hear from him, the man who came 7th last year.
Gary Rogers, you're also looking very, very hot, and it's hard work out there at the moment. What was the problem with the car?
Well, the car was going really well. We didn't have any problems at all. The water temperature's been on 80 Celsius, which is what it should be the whole time. I came in, we did a pit stop, went out, did 1 lap, and the gauge started to move up. And I just kept mine, and it just went off the end. It's obviously, I'd say, done a head gasket.
Gary, there's been an amazing number of pit stops and all sorts of problems with cars. Any particular reason to your mind?
I think the cars are, the class is becoming really competitive now. I think everyone's just trying to get the very last little bit out of it. I think you work your car harder, you work yourself harder, and obviously it's starting to tell the tale on us.
The big crowd at Sandown, not the record that I thought we'd get, and I think that it was generally agreed we would have today, 35,000 plus because of the weather. Although the weather has mostly stayed away, we've had a bit of rain and it's a bleak, windy sort of a day, but they're still enjoying themselves in a race that's quite fascinating. Alan Moffat leading by 27 seconds from Jim Richards. This man, well, Peter Brock that we saw just briefly then, Loman in 6th place, Warren Cullen immediately in front of him. There you see the major placings. The leaders now headed by Moffat on lap 77. The race distance is 129, 400 kilometres. Here's Chris Gibson. in the Nissan Pulsar Turbo.
Second stop unscheduled.
Leads the 3-litre class. Under bonnet they go. Transverse engine, a very neat underbonnet. The turbocharger lies down low to the right-hand side as we're looking at the car, the left-hand side, but very low and forward in the engine compartment. If she crunched the front of that car, the first thing she'd do, first thing she'd hit would be to whack the turbo. A lot of room under bonnet, very neat installation, fuel injection, and believe it or not, it's a 1.5-litre car and it's putting out something like 250 horsepower. Developmental car that first ran at Winton only about 10 days ago and really hasn't given them a moment of trouble. Here you can see the transverse engine, the exhaust pipes coming off forward of it, the fuel injection goes in the back, it's a cross-flow head. The exhaust pipes run off and down to our right as we look there to the turbo.
And there's Mrs. Gibson, wife of Fred, mother of 2.
Racing driver before she met Fred is Chris Cole. And she must be intrepid because years ago she came pillion back from Katoomba with me from a rallycross meeting on a Kawasaki 900 and said she enjoyed every moment of it. So a very non-aggressive yet competent girl, and there's Peter McLeod in the pits, the man who's in 3rd place. He's a lap down to Richards.
McLeod out of the car, putting Graham Bailey, the former Toyota Celica driver, into it.
Look at the neat outfit they've got. They've got their sign posting up, the crew beautifully adorned, the car looks well, and they run a good race. 3rd at Oran Park last year in this. Third also at Amaroo. And therefore in the championship point score, lying second, Graham Bailey, to George Fury on 30 points, 50 points for Fury, 23 for Dick Johnson. Consider that Fury is no longer running, nor is Dick Johnson. Terry Finnegan's not running here today, holding 21.5. Then Barry Seaton on 21, Jim Richards on 20. Barry Jones in the pits in the road radial shod Mazda RX-7, the car that won Amaroo last year, in the hands of both Barry Jones and the more famous Jones Allen.
That car lying 10th at the moment, 2 laps behind the leaders. There is the leader, Alan Moffat.
29 seconds his margin over Richards.
Brock behind him, indicating to his pits that time round, has been closing on the Warren Cullen Ron Harrop Commodore in front by about 1.5 seconds a lap. Aiming for 5th position.
Well, between this car, race leader 29 seconds out in front, second place the BMW number 31, there is a most massive margin. To 3rd place now, Murray Carter. There's team manager Howard Marsden talking to Chris Gibson by the much easier system of radio communication rather than an eye line, rather than yelling through crash helmets and so on.
They need to get their radio communication correct. Yesterday, the drivers discovered that when they turned on their RT, they were making the car cut out. So every time they tried to talk, the car stopped.
Looks bad for Christine Gibson, this inordinately long pit stop. It's already costed a lead in the under 3-litre class.
Yeah, but on the other hand, to get to lap 79 in a motor car that's never fired a shot on a track before is damn good going, just as it is.
Crews always get a bit nervous if nothing goes wrong, because they sort of, you always feel as though you're learning if something goes wrong, but if it doesn't happen, then they sort of think, what's lurking there that we don't know about? Moffat, the race leader. Jim Richards. Still, let's have a look. The gap. 27.7 behind him. Can Richards catch him? Every bit as good a driver as Moffat. Not as intense, but a more natural driver. And can lap just as quickly. A man who's done a lot of racing in very quick sports sedans. now seeming to whittle the lead just a little bit. Can the car do it? Lap 81 they're on, 48 remaining. To recap behind them, Murray Carter is 2 laps down and is in 3rd place. Peter McLeod is 4th, Carter still hasn't pitted. Cullen is 5th, Brock is 6th, Terry Shield 7th, Hansford 8th, 32, Johnny Walker, Gene Cook 9th. Well, they were 2 laps down just by virtue of the start they got. And 41, Barry Jones, Peter Day 10th. And in the heavens above, that might be what's in store. Who knows? It's lurking, certainly, but has mercifully stayed away at the moment while the drivers have been racing for 1 hour, 41 minutes and 10 seconds.
Going through. We may not be too far away from a Moffat-Brock confrontation again. Peter Brock's 2 laps down, but on the circuit he's only about that distance. Just as he leaves pit straight, Brock enters it. And Brock's been circulating pretty quickly in John Harvey's car.
Indeed, he is now 16 seconds behind Cullen. Cullen in 5th, Brock 6th, and it's now down to 14 seconds, pulling it back from 18.3 as we go down to the pit area.
Peter McLeod, the Mazda RX-7 position very well in the race so far.
Yes, we're happy with where we are at this stage. We'd hope to be in the leading 5, and we are, so we'll just keep on going now. We've had our one and only pit stop. It was a quick one. We're looking good.
How does the car feel?
The car's beautiful. It was understeering a lot towards the end, and I have pitted about 10 laps earlier than I intended to. The tyre was completely shredded, and that slowed us down quite a bit over those last 10 laps. But we've got new rubber on now for the next 40, 45 laps. We should be very quick. Probably the last 10 laps will be a bit slow also with that tyre-less car.
First of the major races, how does the car shape up against the others now after you've had a few laps?
Well, it's been very good. Of course, at Amaroo we were 3rd, and at Oran Park we were 3rd. We've come up against the real big cars here, but except for the ejected 13B of Alvin Moffat's, I think we can hold most of our own. And of course, Brock's Commodore and no doubt Dick Johnson. But otherwise, we're looking pretty good with any other car.
And as that conversation was going on, the Christine Gibson car was pushed behind the pit area, so the last of the Nissan turbos has been put away for the day.
And as Alan Moffat came round and completed his 83rd lap, and the clock went to 1 hour 43 minutes, we find that with pit stop, he has averaged 1 minute 14 seconds a lap for the 83 laps, including pit stops.
Moffat's lead now over Richards out to 29.6 seconds. But once again, it's looking very dark here, and if these rain clouds come and another pit stop has to be effected with a change of tyres, Moffat's stop was a lot slower last time than Richards. If we're forced to have another pit stop, we could yet get a race right to the finish.
1:14 comes out to nearly 151 kilometres an hour average speed. Obviously a fair drop from the qualifying times they were doing yesterday.
And hailstones of all things. We're told that there is hail on the circuit, certainly down in front of the grandstand. People's umbrellas are going up everywhere.
And it was forecast for Melbourne today, and the cars are on slicks.
This puts an entirely new complexion on the event. That's a slick racing tyre, you can see.
See the hailstones hitting and bouncing,
yes.
Small ones. But they, in fact, won't make the track as wet as would rain. So the drivers will stick with it for the moment. Richards, 2nd place, 29.6 seconds down. A man said to be a great wet weather driver. A second stop for the Hansford Gary Walden car, and that looks like rain as well as hail.
On lap 83, you can see the rain now starting to really bucket down. This creates a real dilemma for the crews, whether to go to full wet weather tyres and take the risk that the rain continues, because if it doesn't continue, the wet weather tyres will simply wear out and the drivers will have to make another pit stop, whether to go to intermediate tyres and take the risk that the weather doesn't become more wet and therefore the intermediates don't work.
This car in 8th place when it pitted. 9th behind it was 32, Johnny Walker, Gene Cook. 10th was 41, Barry Jones, Peter Dane, both of them Mazda RX-7s. Cullen to Brock, forward of this lot. Cullen a lap down, and in 3rd, Brock now 4th, is just 10 seconds. So Brock really forging forward very well.
Bailey in the Slick 50 car pulls out to challenge Brock.
Moffat is between Cullen and Brock, which is the lap down that Cullen is to Moffat.
And you can see the hail blowing across the track there. Well, this is spring in Melbourne. We had bright sunshine for most of the day, but they say if you don't like the weather, wait a minute.
Just look how heavy it is. You can see it bouncing off the track.
In fact, we say Brock is 2 laps down, but it's only just by that little margin of Moffat sandwiched between him.
And the hail's now stopped as fast as it started.
So that the battle at this stage is unquestionably Brock's pursuit there in car 25 of Cullen. He's only 5.6 seconds in arrears to Cullen in 3rd place. Ron Harrop in Cullen's car at the moment. See there, car 22, Jim Richards holding 2nd. He's 29 seconds behind Moffat. So Brock losing his car with brake problems, crashing it, wasting a lot of time as he had to crawl to the pits, back out again then in John Harvey's car, now back into some sort of major contention, the man that's won this race 8 times, 7 times on the trot in the last 10 years. Alan Moffat, the only other man to have won it in those 10 years. He won it in 74 and last year. Brock won it every other year, except that if we go back to 72, John Goss won it. Let's have a look as he comes across the start-finishing line at what sort of time Peter Brock is lapping at. Start now.
There's a fair old headwind blowing down the straight, impeding the progress of the cars on the main straight out of which Brock has just come.
And there's Brock. The next car in front of him is Harrop, and that's 3rd place. Oh, this is nice, says Peter Brock. Lovely to be back in the 3rd place. Pit crew would be keeping him advised. There's Hansford back into car 42. While we time Brock on this flying lap, I think we're going to see him grab 3rd place. He'll then be out after Jim Richards. This is a new car, just like the Pulsar Turbo that's just recently been parked in the pit area. This car only started running in anger about 10 days ago. There's your lap time, pretty brisk one. And he comes up now to being only a lap down on Richards and Moffat. And to 3rd place. A frantic scramble through Castrol Corner there. But that sort of a move forward can really get a driver going again. It's a good driver who can keep the job in mind all the time and not relax, not get a bit dispirited, but certainly it helps when he achieves a bit of a milepost, pulls up a placing or can sight the leaders or whatever, and Brock, that little milestone of getting past Harrop will, I think, sharpen him just a little bit. 42 laps remaining. It's not impossible that he could get up and get closer to Jim Richards. He lapped only 1 second a lap faster in qualifying yesterday. Of course, is now in the second of the dealer team cars.
And for about the last 10 laps, he's had Alan Moffat in his sights. That's Moffat 2 cars ahead. And so we could get to a Brock-Moffat duel fairly shortly.
Moffat would be fairly silly to allow himself to be sucked into that sort of thing, because with the lead he's got over Richards, the last thing he needs is to have a race between himself and Peter Brock, slowing him down, because Richards is only 28.6 seconds behind, and if they were 27.6 seconds behind, taking a second off Moffat right there. And if Moffat were to allow himself to indulge himself in a race with Peter Brock, it could well cost him the time that he has on Jim Richards. As Peter Brock locks up wheels now, he can see Moffat in front and he wants him.
Got to be in a hurry. And Moffat see Brock locking up like that. We've seen him locking the left front as he's turned into corners. Honda corner at Amaru Park and Dandenong Road corner here. The slow, tight corners where you use a lot of brakes as you turn in. But he locked up pretty well everything there.
The gap between Moffat and Brock is 3.2 seconds.
Wouldn't he love to get up there and have a scrap with Moffat? Moffat's the man that gets under the skin of so many of the other drivers, and now to drive the drivers mad, the sun is shining after that freak hailstorm. Well, we've had Drew Morfitt's a Melbourne specialist. We've had a couple of the year's seasons today, Drew, in a couple of hours. What else have they got in store for us?
I don't think we've quite had the 4 seasons. It has been hot enough for summer.
No doubt about that. It was bleak in the pit area this morning with a strong wind and cold. It really was brisk. There's your situation. Peter Brock, if he can get past Moffat now, he removes that horrible little -1 lap to him in 3rd place. They're on their 91st. 38 remain. And this gap, it's on lap and 2.9 seconds. So Brock's narrowing it. It's Murray Carter sandwiched in there. Beninka going again after being pushed up the main straight. And Brock, the only 2 men that have won this race in the last 10 years. Moffat in the lead. He's won it twice. Brock in 3rd place. He's won it 8 times.
Whoop, and there goes the Beninka Alpha as it tries to get out of Brock's way. Moffat won the race in 1974 and last year after a heated political and legal argument.
And the gap, 1st to 2nd, is 27.6. As it's been, it's varied just in a few hundredths there, but for the last couple of laps. So this man, Richards, would like to try and attack Moffat. Problem apparently that took Alan Moffat's pit stop out to nearly 1 minute when he pitted on lap 65 was that he'd just run it so dry that it had no fuel. It just took a lot of turning over to get fuel up into the car, into the motor.
Well, that poses the question then. That was exactly half race distance. Is he going to run it so dry to complete the race?
It's about a lap past half, so it just might be, but it's a good question and well asked, because it would depend on how well they top the tank, and probably not as well as when they started the race in the pits, although they had 2 warm-up laps there. But also he's getting pressure on him here from Jim Richards, and he's getting pressure ultimately from Peter Brock as Richards past Greg Hansford. And the gap, Brock 1 lap and 2.9 seconds down still to the race leader Alan Moffat, and also in 3rd place. Greg Hansford tucked in there behind Richards. He's continuing with the problem that he mentioned earlier when he handed it over to Gary Walden for an intermediate session. And that's gear selection problems. It's taxing the former motorcycle racer. Pitted on lap 83. He's been out now for 10 laps. We're on lap 93. Richards.
Gap between Moffat and Brock is down to 2.9. It doesn't vary on that lap.
Behind Richards is Brock, Cullen. Further lap back to Peter McLeod, Murray Carter, Terry Shield, Greg Hansford. 32, Johnny Walker, Gene Cook, and 12 now coming up into consideration, Jim Keogh, the Team Toshiba Holden Commodore. A lovely flowing driver, Jim Richards, very pretty to watch, very smooth, and it's that, I think, that's given him his wet weather reputation, because wet weather above all calls on technique and smoothness. Jim Richards certainly has that. One of those drivers who looks so unflurried and so smooth that, as I say, under the problems of wet weather driving, it translates to being able to be very quick. As Frank Gardner says, though, too, he is an absolutely confident man in the motor car. The supreme confidence of his ability to master it, to make it do what he wants it to do. Moffat, Brock, 2.3. Richards to Brock, 1 minute 59.7 seconds.
That's the gap from second place Richards to third place Peter Brock. With 94 laps completed. And Peter Brock on two wheels as he comes over the top of Rothman's Rise, now locking up everything. Brock is punishing this motor car like we hardly ever see Brock punish a motor car, but he has decided that it's really do or die.
Let's go down to the pit area.
Interesting situation developing in the pit area at the moment. You may recall that Alan Moffat came in at around about lap 65, and we've already reported the fact that the car was right out of fuel. The interesting situation is, therefore, what happens when we get to lap 129? Will the Mazda run out of fuel? That, of course, is to be answered. The interesting thing, of course, is that if any other competitor can push the car along, they may run dangerously close to running out of fuel.
Well, now, with Jim Richards, 1 minute 59.7 in front of Brock, let's say 2 minutes, that's a lap and 46 seconds. It means that Brock is 2 laps behind Alan Moffat. And if he can catch him now by this frustrating just under 2 seconds and separates the two of them, he'll be just under the 2 laps behind Moffat.
In fact, the gap has opened quite substantially. There's now 3.8 seconds between Alan Moffat and Peter Brock there. So whether Moffat's responding to the challenge from his old rival, or whether it's to the challenge from Jim Richards, Brock certainly dropped back on that lap.
And in the 3-litre class, Laurie Nelson, of course, with the retirement of the Pulsar, has gone back to the lead in the V6. Car 64, Jim Mile, Peter Engelhardt, Mazda RX-7, 58. Ray Cutchy, Mike Quinn, Ford Escort, and 61. John White and Holden Gemini.
4.2 seconds the gap between Alan Moffat and Peter Brock as they cross the start-finish line.
A massive array of instruments inside the RX-7 for the drivers to peruse and switches. They have gauges for both gearbox and differential temperatures, and they have switches for fans to turn them on, so that if it's a hot day or they're running particularly hard and the temperatures start to creep up, they can switch them on and cool them down again. And that's quite within the rules. And there's Dick Johnson
with his wife Jill. And Dick looking about as sad as he did when he hit the Rocket Bathurst in 1980.
Peter McLeod and Jones. Barry Jones there. Greg Hansford back in the seat. There's the Bob Holden Escort that's lying third in the 3-litre class. Mitsubishi Colt going up the back straight. Rob Shute, Ian Burrell, number 66 in the race leader, Moffat. 27 27.2 seconds in front of Jim Richards. Time is starting to run out a little for Richards because he's getting close to needing a second a lap to catch Alan Moffat. 97th lap they're on, 32 laps remain, and the gap is 27 seconds. So as I say, it's getting close to a second a lap, and anybody who can pick up a second a lap on this car driver combination is travelling very, very well indeed.
Brock continues to drop back off Moffat. He's now 4.8 seconds behind.
In fact, as Jim Richards goes up to 29.2 seconds behind Moffat, the inevitability of his being unable to catch him comes closer. We've been racing for 2 hours, 1 minute and a quarter. They've covered 96, they're on their 97th lap. Peter Brock uses the curbing just to lighten the inside of the car and throw it out to the outside of the track. And his pursuit of Moffat is now off. In terms of trying to haul him, he's 4.67 seconds behind him. Rumour that he overtook Ron Harrop a while ago, and Brock locks wheels in a fair few places. Harrop is really very far behind him, and he's on the same lap in 4th.
39 starters in the Castrol 423 remain.
As we look at the under 3 litre class, Laurie Nelson there, the V6 Capri, coming back into the class leadership. This man, 31.2 now behind Moffat. Alan Moffat, like Alan Grice and Colin Bond, recently a father. Jim Richards, 35-year-old New Zealand-born man living in Melbourne now. Started racing at 65 in New Zealand. Won the James Hardy partnering Peter Brock in 78, 9 and 80. And then when Alan Grice left the JPS BMW team, Frank Gardner co-opted Richards to the team, so he left that very successful combination where he played second fiddle to Brock and didn't do a lot of driving at other times in the year, to being the lead driver in the BMW team. It's been a mixed year for him because they run both a sports sedan or a Grand Touring car, GT car as they now call the class, and also this touring car. Well, the touring car hasn't been aired until the Endurance Championships this year in the way that CAMS were allowing, or the specifications they were insisting on for it. Team leader Frank Gardner thought it was uncompetitive, but Richards ran the GT Turbo BMW, looked like winning that, until of course the car was absolutely wiped out by Brock, this man, at the start in Adelaide, just a couple of days after Jim Richards had been to New Zealand for his father's funeral. Missed practices, had to practice on Sunday morning, and then had the car wiped out on him on race morning. Alan Moffat, like Brock, many times Bathurst winner and Australian touring car champion, the reigning touring car champion, of course, winning the title convincingly this year. Winning at Calder, Wanneroo, at Surfers and at Oran Park. Finishing with a total of 166 points from George Fury on 160. Peter Brock, third in the series finally on 128 points. Finally winning at both Adelaide and Lakeside.
Holden Commodores today forced to run without the adjustable trim tabs on the rear spoiler, which they had fitted in the hope that they would get better stability through the corners and hopefully into this straight quite a deal faster by being able to get through the corner onto the straight quicker and get about 150 revs more by the time they reach a point in the braking area just before Yellow Terracotta. Federation of Australian Motorsport, in its wisdom, decided yesterday that the trim tabs had not been homologated by them, and instructed the Commodores today, all 13 of them in this event, that they could not run the trim tabs except in the down position. That and many other dramas caused by the flurry of new regulations which have seen new cars come to the track this weekend, all to be decided before the James Hardy 1000 in 2 weeks' time by a plethora of CAMS committees in the next 2 weeks.
Peter Brock here in car 25, John Harvey's car. You rarely see Peter Brock drive 05 as hairily as he appeared to be driving this one. I'm just asking the question, are the car 05 and 25 set up exactly the same by the dealer team?
Not exactly the same, but they do come fairly close in their setup. There was a time long ago when Peter and John would use the two cars in development purposes, and even today to a degree. They tried different things on the cars. Yesterday, for example, Brock went with the new Avon tyres. Harvey stayed with the controlled Dunlops to give the team some relativity between the performance of the two components. But as a general rule, Peter Brock could be able to step into this motor car and lap almost identically to his own 05 vehicle.
Except that the 05 car now, of course, is a brand new one, because this car is from last Bathurst, but normally they certainly are very similar in specification. It's sometimes the case that the number 2 team car is actually quicker. It's not quicker with the number 2 driver, but it's actually quicker than the number 1. It's so with the STP Roadways team, where Grice has lapped every bit as quick with Steve Harrington's car as he's lapped in his own.
In fact, there's reason to believe that the Harrington car is substantially faster, well, not substantially, but certainly a better motor car than the one Grice is in. The Harrington car is the one which Grice last year set the first ever 100-mile-per-hour lap of touring car lap of Mount Panorama in.
Peter Brock, 38 years old, started racing as a real outlaw. This is the way we see the placings. Alan Moffat from Jim Richards, Peter McLeod, you can see 102 laps completed. Peter McLeod third in car 50, Peter Brock fourth in car 25. Now the contention arises from the lap score thing for which the TV people are working, saying that it is Moffat, Richards, Brock, Cullen, McLeod. And we now disagree with that.
That chart says that Brock is only 1 lap down, and yet it also says that he's 2 minutes, over 2 minutes behind the second place getter, so it must put him 2 laps down.
Well, 1 lap and a major part, so. In fact, it's got to be 2 because he never did haul Moffat on that when he was running behind him, as we see here. So it's got to be 2 and just a few seconds. Yes, Peter Brock was the real little outlaw down in Victoria in his Austin A30 bodied 6-cylinder Holden powered sports sedan. The sinister looking black beard. And then he was the Victorian specialist, and people said, by gee, that little car with that bloke driving it down in Victoria is quick. And he got picked up and finally by the Holden dealer team. Came third at his first outing at Bathurst in the year that Colin Bond won, 1969. And Alan Moffat there looking warily at Terry Shiel in 37. Shiel, our lap scorers tell us, is in 7th. But now, confident and goes by. But since those days, Brock has won 3 touring car championships and 6 Bathursts. Alan Moffat's done pretty well for himself too. Touring car champion in 73, 76, 77 and 83. James Hardy winner 4 times also, 70, 71, 73 and 77. The big question mark is whether in 3 weeks' time he can take his 5th James Hardy victory after a gap of 6 years. And people perhaps in the jubilation of the way that he's run in recent times in the development and now the race-winning form of this Mazda RX-7 forget that he was seemingly down and out when his days at Ford, with Ford, came to an end. He was out of money, he was out of performance, he ran a couple of desultory Bathursts where he must surely have known that the car was pretty much likely to blow before he really went very far in the race. When they came from 100-octane fuel to normal road fuel, he ran only a matter of laps before he was blowing engines in practices. Then race day, put in another engine and ran very consistently actually, but they were bad days for Alan Moffat. He talked Mazda into getting going, and he linked up with Stuyvesant with a lavish presentation down here in Melbourne. Couples flown in from all over the place, hundreds of people, roses in containers to all the ladies present. And that was the start of it all, and it won him the Touring Car Championship this year, the Endurance Championship driver last year, and looks pretty fairly set with a lead of 36 seconds on lap 105 to win him his 3rd Castrol 400 at Sandown. Nothing to do with Stuyvesant or the Mazda, but he and his wife Pauline had their first child this year. Something people were wondering if he ever wanted a family or whether the intensity of the racing sort of pushed that thing to the back of his mind. But he's starting to talk now like a man who perhaps might ease out of the race situation, because he's certainly looking to groom somebody who can take over as lead driver when he perhaps reverts to team managership, and that's the role in which he, in the long term, perhaps sees Greg Hansford, his number 2 driver.
Well, in fact, he was quite keen to bail out as long ago as 1977 when he first invited Hansford to join the team. Hansford instead decided to chase the World Motorcycle Grand Prix Championship in Europe with Kawasaki and declined Alan's offer to join the Ford Falcon team then on a full-time basis. But as long ago as that, Moffat had declared his intention that he wanted to hand over the reins. Second position, Jim Richards, 36 seconds behind Alan Moffat, as the BF Goodrich car leaves a little bit of its rubber behind.
New Zealand Touring Car Champion, 71 and 1972. New Zealand Production Car Champion, 72, 73 and 74. Ran very well in a Triumph 2.5 in a couple of heatway rallies in New Zealand. And Hannu Mikkola, a world champion rally driver, said, boy, is he good on dirt. He really could go places in rallying, but he's made racing his forte. Had his own lightweight sports sedan Falcon, which he ran very well for some while with Bob Jane Team Art assistance, and he in fact runs a Team Art. Really quiet man. Wrinkles up and smiles and talks to you quietly. And one of the people whom I think nobody in motor racing dislikes or has disagreements with, and whom I know, Frank Gardner, his team manager in the JPS BMW team, is absolutely delighted. A great development driver and a man who runs absolutely to instructions, works well with the team. What can you say about that man? Except that he's not usually as untidy as that. If we talk of Moffat retiring, surely one day we've got to talk of Brock retiring too.
Just look at his rear left tyre. Is that getting a bit flat, Will? So Brock's rear left tyre.
Well, I think something may well be amiss as he keeps to the inside. And does he go to the pits? Peter Brock, variously in either 3rd or 4th place, depending on who you believe in the lap scoring system. We say 4th. The Ray Morris system says 3rd, and into the pits he goes. A dreadful race for the man who's won it 8 times, and no more. Thank you. No. Pointing to the left rear. One of the great problems this weekend has been that so many teams have been running under new specification and testing which the professional teams would have done back at racetracks midweek, and finding out the problems, solving them, and coming to the meetings race ready. That sort of testing is being done under race conditions this weekend. It's been partially responsible, by no means totally responsible, but certainly been partially responsible for some of the troubles the teams have run into today. Bluebird, for instance, with their turbo, the Nissan team, haven't done nearly as much testing as they would like to have done.
Well, you can't win at Sandown with 3 pit stops.
No show. One is all you can take. Alan Moffat is the man who's in jeopardy of having to take 2 because of his fuel position.
Peter Brock's had a really mixed race, but the car that he's in has actually had 4 pit stops now, and this man, though, has run like clockwork, and that's usually what gets you to the flag first, as there's a spin down the bottom.
That's Scotty Taylor's car.
Car 24, Scotty Taylor, Kevin Kennedy, car from Wodonga. And takes a while to sort it out. The driver now wondering if somebody's going to arrive helter-skelter heading for his spot on the track.
A couple of the cars now with windscreen wipers going, so there may be just a few fresh spots of rain now.
I think that's what's in the forefront.
Taylor takes off the wrong way up the track, but anything to get out of that very precarious position.
Fairly indictable offence, actually, driving against the direction of traffic on a racetrack. And the rain coming down quite heavily. So Taylor and Kennedy could be at the forefront of a number of errors at this stage as Moffat goes for the wipers. He's completed 111 laps, Richards on 110. Richards some 37.6 seconds behind. He's now on 111, 38.24. Richards in arrears. And that's the contingency plan for car number 25. Wet weather tyres, grooved to dispense the water. And I have to say that I'm not sure whether they've got wet weather Avons ready for them.
No, they haven't. They're running Pirelli P7s in the wet and Michelin's as the intermediate tyres.
Murray Carter in there behind Peter McLeod. They being shown as 5th and 6th place respectively.
And in fact, in these sort of conditions, the plan would be to put the Pirellis on the front to give absolute accurate traction and to put the Michelins on the rear for longevity.
Have a look at this pair. Peter McLeod, Graham Bailey action at the helm in car number 50. And behind him is Murray Carter. They're arguing over 5th position. Because Bailey there in 50, Carter there in 5th and 6th placing. Runoff area on the outside of Castrol Corner down the end of Pitt Straight, and the lake in the centre now that looks quite glamorous in the middle of the Sandown horse race track, which also doubles as a motor race circuit, as Peter McLeod, and there's the Burrell chute Mitsubishi Colt going round and just caught neatly. He says, I'll get out of the way and then think about it, regather my thoughts and my courage before I rejoin. But that was pretty well caught, actually, the little front-wheel drive Colt, which next year they hope to take to turbocharged version, but a rather modest 120 horsepower. Let's have another look at it. And all locked up over the curving. And at this stage, drivers have a policy, and that is stand very hard on the brakes. And then he actually stood off them there. The car grabbed again and started to drive off, and he picked the brakes up again when they weren't locked up. And quite a nice bit of sort of catch it at the end driving. The escort that Mike Quinn is sharing, that's owned by Bob Holden, sharing with Ray Cutchie, former Alan Moffat mechanic.
Leo Leonard in the car now.
Solicitor. Leo Leonard, the New Zealand, shares with him. And then Barry Jones took me for a high-speed lap around here last week. Very interesting it was too. Very good, gets the car very sideways. First gear down at Castrol Corner and Dandenong Road for Barry Jones. Not running race tyres though, like every other car in the field, running Goodrich 50 series TA radials, road tyres, high performance road tyres. And a bit laps remain for the race leader, coming round to complete his 115th in 129 lap. 400 kilometre race. 40 seconds in front of the quiet New Zealander Jim Richards.
Jim Keogh works, or rather Leo Leonard works the Commodore to right to the limit under brakes. Trying to stay with Moffat, but it's a useless task, really.
Still the 3-litre class being led by Laurie Nelson in the Ford Capri number 59 from 64, Jim Mile, Peter Englehart's Mazda RX-7 and 58, Ray Cutchie, Mike Quinn, that Ford Escort we saw briefly then, entered by Bob Holden Motors. The second place is 40 seconds down now, so the question very much answered by Alan Moffat out in front, whose crew kept him well informed, obviously, of Richard's aspirations on him. And he was able to widen the gap while still looking after his car, and on the other hand, Richards couldn't or do anything about it. Fairly happy, I'd think, with second place, because they and their sponsor JPS have had some pretty disappointing times, quite frankly. This will really spark them, and everybody's been saying of this car, a lot of the other drivers using a well-worn old phrase, much hackneyed phrase of it being a dark horse, but it actually has come out to be such this weekend, and they hope and think and pray that that at Bathurst it will really work extremely well. A longer race, of course, than this, where they hope its reliability too will play an important and favourable part.
I've just put a lap on Alan Moffat. He is still lapping at 1 minute 13 seconds. He just pulled himself into a groove which isn't that far off his actual sprint lap record around here. And he's just able to turn laps within half a second of each other, seemingly all day long. A superb effort from Alan Moffat.
Yes, and if we've got some variety in the car and driver war, between Moffat first, Richards second, Brock fourth, we've got a cigarette war as well between three large manufacturers. And the budget to run teams like this really is enormous. And it's been spoken of tentatively in some quarters that perhaps Marlborough and the Holden dealer team might apart at some stage. They certainly, and say publicly, they'll have a very much reduced. The budget to run teams like this really is enormous. And it's been spoken of tentatively in some quarters that perhaps Marlborough and the Holden dealer team might part at some stage. They certainly, and say publicly, they'll have a very much reduced promotional presence at Bathurst this year. JPS, I imagine, will be fairly fired up to be quite positive up at Bathurst. This really is an inspired showing.
Richards pulls a 1 minute 14 second lap, so that's the difference. He's about a second off the Moffat pace. There's Moffat.
And the margin between the two, 38.6 seconds.
Or to put it in track terms, as Moffat goes down the front straight and crossing the start-finish line, Richards is up the top of the back straight at Rothman's Rise. Moffat using all the track there, as you can see. Sometimes a driver has to get himself into a groove which may seem suicidally quick when he's got the race well and truly in his grasp, but it's necessary for the driver to be able to choose a pace in which he feels comfortable and at which he can keep up his concentration. Certainly a lot of answers left unanswered in the Castrol 400 today. People who wanted to see how the Ford Falcon of Dick Johnson would go against the fuel-injected 13B engine of Alan Moffat, who wanted to see how a well-performing Peter Brock would go as well, and whether the new IHI turbocharger of the Nissans was going to do the trick for them.
If Alan Moffat's lapping in a 13, so too is Peter Brock. Just got Peter Brock at a 1:13 as he dashes around in 4th place. And a number of teams, including some of the Mazda teams, some of whom haven't even yet got their 13B big capacity engine, and none other of whom have the fuel injection. I suspect the Stuyvesant Moffat team played it fairly cagily because they were going to protest it if the stuff wasn't available freely. Well, then Moffat shouldn't have it either, but the Moffat team had a fuel injection system in the pits, and they said anybody who wants it can come and buy it. When we asked how much it was, he said, I don't know. Although Peter McLeod says, well, I can't afford $10,000, and so I'm not a customer for it. And that's generally agreed. It's about the price. Perhaps it's as cheap as $8,000, but it's no cheaper than that. That's for the fuel injection pump and all the unit that goes with it. Makes these cars very much more crisper on the throttle. In fact, Alan Moffat says it makes a difference as he changes gear. Normally when he lifts off and then comes back onto the throttle, he was getting jerky gear changes with the fuel injection because it cut off so cleanly when he lifted his foot off and came back on so crisply that he's actually had to adjust the timing of his gear changing, his operation of the clutch and throttle, to get it nice and smooth by comparison with the carbureted motor.
Murray Carter then trying to cling to Alan Moffat. Carter in 6th position, 2 laps down.
Shield, Moffat. Shield holding 7th.
Brock, after his pit stop, starting to close the gap on the car 22, 3rd placed Warren Cullen, Ron Harrop. Harrop in the car, now down to 11.32 seconds.
That would make sense, because that 1:13 lap for Brock would be is the same time that Moffat's been timed on recently.
9 laps remaining in the Castrol 400.
120 therefore completed. Works out at 372 kilometres covered, 28 remaining. And up onto the grass, parking his car, one of the 3-litre class Mazda RX-7s.
No, it's Beninka.
Oh, the Beninka Alpha again. He just likes parking on the straight. And the gap Cullen to Brock, 3rd to 4th, 10.3 seconds now. Down in 2 laps by 2.2 seconds. Let's recap then the positions as we see them. Not only there, outright, and as we're given the lap scoring by the Ray Morris system, at lap 120. We have in 3rd place Warren Cullen, 4th place Peter Brock, 5th place Peter McLeod, 6th Murray Carter, 7th Terry Shield, 8th Greg Hansford, 9th car number 12, which is Jim Keogh, Leo Leonard, and behind them Barry Jones, Peter Dane in the radial shod Mazda RX-7 number 41.
In the 3-litre cars, car 59, Laurie Nelson and Peter Jones in the Ford Capri are ahead of car 64, Jim Mayle and Peter Engelhardt in a Mazda RX-7, and car 58, Ray Cutchy and Mike Quinn in the Ford Escort.
Brock now in a hurry, 9.7 seconds, another 0.6 of a second on Warren Cullen in 3rd place. But they're all scrapping 2 laps out of contact with the race leaders, Alan Moffat and Jim Richards, past Barry Jones. Barry Jones in 12th. There's the 3rd place in the 3-litre class, the Quinn Cutchy Ford Escort owned by Bob Holden. Due for the treatment by race leader Moffat.
And if you're a betting man, you'd have to say that the odds have shortened remarkably on Alan Moffat for a James Hardy 1000 win this year. Of a lot of motorsport enthusiasts and will be talked about for the next 2 weeks almost ceaselessly is how fast could Moffat really have gone had he been pushed today?
Well, for Brock to be able to be lapping at about the same time, he's thrown up more smoke from the tyres today than you'd see in 10 years of motor racing from Peter Brock.
See nothing from Alan Moffat, have you? Smooth, controlled driving, staying well within the almost well within the boundaries of the track.
Peter Brock just returning a 1:13.6 is now just 8.1 seconds in arrears. He's in 4th place, but chasing Warren Cullen in 3rd. Look at him doing hard arm work and really chucking that car around. Peter Brock's put in as much hard work here today as anybody, coping with a fair number of problems and coping pretty well as he kicks the car up onto 2 wheels, bounds it through the corner, and that is a most deceptive, quick, yet potentially disastrous corner. And he comes up this time and does a 13.67. I had him on a 13.66 the previous lap. So within a little bit of error, he's varying his laps only by hundredths of a second in beautiful consistency around Sandown. Seconds now, the gap. The tantalizing distance between him and 3rd place. How many laps has that man done around this circuit, Sandown Park, in his home city? Must be thousands of laps. Many of them have been race leadership laps. Quite a number have been lap record scoring laps. And Cullen goes to the pits. So Peter Brock, is Cullen in fact going in to retire his car? That's Ron Harrop, but it may just be for a churn of fuel. It's lap 125.
There's the security churn waiting to go.
Last in on lap 66. So very bad luck. 3rd place gone. Peter Brock 3rd.
Stopped for exactly 5.8 seconds. Of course, in the pits for longer than that, as you saw from the graphic.
2 Stuyvesant Mazdas running round in close company. Murray Carter in the car that he debuted at Oran Park.
And the two Peter Stuyvesant Mazdas get together again briefly on the track as the boss rounds up Greg Hansford.
Let's consider, we've given you the driver point score, but let's consider the manufacturer situation in the Endurance Championship, and it was originally conceived as a manufacturer's championship. Nissan lead on 50 points from Mazda on 40, Ford on 37, Holden 36, Audi 21, BMW 20 and Chevrolet 11. Scored on a similar system to the Touring Car Championship, so for outright place 25 points to the driver or car.
5 laps remaining. You'd have to say that Alan Moffat is looking at a formation finish, wouldn't you think?
I would think so. Looks very much like the plot. 1977 Bathurst in the Fords 1-2 with Colin Bond to be repeated here, I think, with Greg Hansford battling on well in the sister car 42.
In 8th position.
In fact, the Stuyvesant team have 3 race-ready Mazda RX-7s. The one that Moffat is in is a new car that was constructed during the Touring Car Championship and debuted. Murray Carter wondering if at this sort of formation speed, if he can join in the glory. The gap Moffat to Richards, 38.6 seconds. He must keep that in mind.
In fact, Carter pulls out now and passes Hansford. And if Moffat maintains this speed, there's every possibility that Carter will pass him as well. This must lead us to start to now ask seriously the question about Moffat's fuel capacity. Is he trying to ease the car to the finish without taking an extra stop, which of course would put him in jeopardy on Jim Richards, who's only 38.6 seconds behind.
Moffat pitted on lap 68, so he's trying to do 65 it was.
Carter's through, and Moffat has backed off the pace quite substantially.
So he's planning to do 64
Peter
laps.
McLeod is off the track. He's pulled up beside the Bonica Alpha.
He's waiting to go to the finishing line under his own power, going up high on the grass.
He's in 5th position at the moment, but he'll drop back several laps. 127 laps, 2 to go.
Murray Carter is immediately behind him. Terry Shield, Greg Hansford, Jim Keogh.
Hansford tails Moffat as they get out of the way of just about everyone else.
The gap, Moffat to Richards, has jumped or dropped enormously to 25 seconds. So, boy, this just might be a real heartbeat finish.
Moffat, the master of suspense, the man who engineered the mid-race pit stop in the Australian Touring Car Championship at Wanneroo in Perth at the beginning of the year.
In fact, Graham Bailey out of car number 50 and walking away from it as if there's no chance of him even getting it to the finishing line. Or perhaps he's just going up to officials to ask how many laps does he have to stay there. They've covered 127. Coming
lap.
Up to finish 128. And Alan Moffat, the race leader, is out on his final now, 3.1 kilometres to victory. And to his 3rd win it will be in this endurance race at Sandown. Swarming along with Greg Hansford tucked in behind him, his teammate, who's in 8th place. One of the few intact 2-car teams in the race. 20 seconds only in front now. Alan Moffat from Jim Richards in the JPS BMW in 2nd place. 3rd place is being held by Peter Brock, car 25. 4th place by Ron Harrop, Warren Cullen, car 22. 5th place was Peter McLeod. It slipped. It'll be Murray Carter, then it'll be Terry Shield, Greg Hansford, Jim Keogh, and Barry Jones. But what a debut for the big capacity 13B rotary Wankel Mazda engine, and also the fuel injection system for it that's supposed to improve the car's fuel economy as well as give it crisper response and a bit more torque and power as he sweeps onto the straight for the final time. 2 hours, 39 minutes, 2 hours, 40 minutes of racing now as he comes up to the start finishing line. Greg Hansford beside him, and victory in the Castrol 400 race at Sandown. 129 laps, 400 kilometres completed by the 43-year-old Canadian-born Alan Moffat.
Jim Richards takes second position and does so only 15.6 seconds behind Alan Moffat.
That's in the JPS BMW.
There he is.
Great placing. He and team leader Frank Gardner will really be delighted. The race time 2 hours, 40 minutes, 4.58 seconds. As the cars pull up now, and officials direct them to the presentation area. Peter Brock, third there, in the car that he took over from John Harvey on lap number 65, lap 65. Peter Brock took over car 25 after his own car 05 was fairly second-hand. Brakes not working well and an accident, a little bit of accident damage. Fourth place, according to the Ray Morris lap scoring system. Warren Cullen, Ron Harrop in 22 from Murray Carter, Terry Shield, Greg Hansford, Jim Keogh and Barry Jones.
In the under 3,000cc class, car 59, Laurie Nelson, Peter Jones. From car 64, Jim Mile, Peter Engelhardt, and car 58, Ray Cutchy and Mike Quinn. And has Moffat run out of fuel? Mick Webb is sitting beside him, his chief mechanic, and the Peter Stuyvesant Mazda rolls to a halt and backwards, and that could be just how close Alan Moffat came to not winning the Castrol 400. It's a long walk to the victory dais from there.
Alan Moffat loves things to be done properly, and he's not too much in favour, I suspect, of arriving at a presentation thing on the end of a tow rope, but he'd much rather be there on the end of the tow rope and picking up first prize than not getting there, and that's...
Where he is right up the back of the rear straight.
And bump starting it in reverse gear. Trying to. Mick Webb.
There's a lot of people standing around the start-finish line at the moment with trophies in hand, wondering what is going on.
And the sooner officials can get a service vehicle to him, the sooner we're likely to see him round at the start-finish line. Although Mick Webb running for the car makes one suspect that perhaps they've rectified the problem.
Yep, they're underway.
And here comes Jim Richards round to the start finishing line. What a good performance from the BMW 635. As John Smith gets wheeled out now, because there is still a Formula Pacific race around at the Australian Drivers' Championship to take place at Sandown on what has turned out now to be quite a sunny day with a pleasant clear sky, at least partly overhead, some cloud, but plenty of blue available too as Moffat weaves his way through officials and others. And Alan Moffat's expired again, I think.
Doesn't look good.
Gasping and spluttering. And a very interesting race, because for all the questions that it answered on the 13B with fuel injection, it left unanswered questions on Dick Johnson's Falcon in its current form on a circuit which should have suited it so well. The Nissan Bluebirds, victorious in 2 of the previous rounds, seem to be in all the trouble in the world, and their little glamour car, the Pulsar Turbo, which above all things was to finish, also appears to be in some trouble, although it's very short on development and one doesn't castigate it by any means for its failure today. But let's go down now to the presentation and to Drew Morfitt.
So by the skin of his teeth, Alan Moffat got home to win his 3rd Sandown endurance race. We did hope to get a word with Alan, but he's on the other side of the track, a bit too far away for him, for us to get to him. Hope you've enjoyed the telecast of the Castrol 400 from Sandown on ABC Sport. That's all we have for you this afternoon. So Drew Morford at Sandown in Melbourne, ABC Sport.